figures out to you, but we are prioritizing staff professional development this year, understanding that they have sacrificed a great deal, and we want to make sure we are investing in them. And we also did indeed decide, based on the results, to invest $3,000 in the Asana program that is going to help us, especially with our committees stay organized. Two other quick updates that you'll see here in the leadership report. As many of you know, based on a vote in council yesterday, the mayor's budget submission deadline is being extended again to May 27th. This is to allow the U.S. Department of Treasury to provide guidance on how states may use some of the stimulus funds. And so we will be on the lookout for that. That does and will impact our budget hearing. And so we will give you more information as we learn of it. And then lastly, as we heard today, OSSI did in fact receive an approval letter from the U.S. Department of Education for its waiver application. And we are really excited. For the members of the public, OSSI requested, as many know, to waive this year's standardized testing requirements, as well as the accountability metrics that are associated with them. And despite I believe no other state in the union being approved, OSSI and DC is the first. And so we will see if others will follow. But that is big news. And we do want to just show our appreciation again for OSSI, for the thought that they put in the application, but also the thought with which they engage the state board. So members, that is this month's leadership report. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Mr. Hayworth, I'm going to go to you for our Executive Director report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it very much. I want to note that I am not currently in Washington, D.C., but I am on vacation, and I want to extend my appreciation to the staff who have really stepped up and done some amazing things just in the few days that I've been gone, and I really appreciate it. Other things will wait until email, but I do want to note, especially for some upcoming events that some members have been sending out, including from Mr. Chang about the April 14th event, where I believe everyone is participating in some way or another in a Reading in the Park event, which I think is really, really exciting for us to be involved in that. So if Mr. President, if you don't mind, I would like to give a couple minutes for him to Mr. Chang to explain the program and talk about where it's happening.
Hey, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Hayworth, President Parker. Yeah, so on April 14th, all the members of the Board of Ed will be convening outdoor story time in outdoor spaces in all 8 wards across the city. This is during spring break, and we'll be reading books that are provided and curated for us by the DC Public Library, with reading guides that they've built for us and activities that they've designed for us as well, as guidance. And for me, this is really exciting. It's you all know that I'm very interested in literacy, and of course, a piece of that is developing the love of reading and the relationships around that. A lot of the students across the city, as we know, have not had opportunities to gather in person for activities that are like this, meant to be joyful, right, for some time. And another piece of this that I am very excited about is it's providing us with an opportunity to engage with our constituents in more informal ways, right? And to get to know them and learn about their perspectives and experiences in a more informal setting. And I'm excited to share that we have 3 council members currently confirmed to participate with us in Ward 2, 4, and 8. So council members Pinto, George, and Councilmember Treyon White, Sr. And the full list of locations we'll be sharing out soon. Right now, you can find it on most of our Twitter accounts, but we have been mostly focusing on first inviting the local elementary schools that are nearest the sites, the outdoor spaces that we've selected for a pilot event like this, in part because we have a cap on the total number of people we're allowed during a pandemic to gather at once. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining me and participating in this. I am excited and eager. We're 1 week out.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Hayworth, does that conclude your report?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Members, I do see that the auditor, Kathy Patterson, and Ms. Roth have joined us. So welcome. I want, before they share, to pause, as I mentioned, to just recognize the life and legacy of Elizabeth Davis. I intentionally wanted to wait for the auditor staff to get here because I'm sure you too will want to share reflections. It goes without saying that Elizabeth Davis, or Liz, as many of us referred to her as and knew her, was a teacher's teacher. She was an educator. She was tireless. As I said in a statement, she was unflappable, and what you saw is what you got. And she was consistent, and that is something that I really appreciate. And it really struck me yesterday in a conversation I was having, is that it's not an overstatement to say, because of her advocacy and her actions this past year, especially, lives were saved. And the debate and the struggle around reopening schools, and while we all will agree that we want what is best for students, I just really appreciate, and I pray that Liz knew how much appreciation many had for the fight that she waged on behalf of teachers and their health and their families. And so that is something that sticks with me. And I just want to just ensure that the education equity, something that many people talk about, Liz really lived it. And so it is really, I'm still really struggling to wrap my mind around the fact that she's not here. As many of you know, many were struggling Monday with the news, and she surely will be missed. And so I will stop there, but well, actually, I will say one other thing. I have had no less than 10 conversations this week with education officials, elected officials, governing officials here in DC, and all of them just spoke about the great admiration that they had with Liz. And regardless of where folks stood on the issues or where they, their perspectives, their entry points, they all, one thing that was consistent across them was her honesty and bravery. And as one person reflected about the reopening struggle, that she was elevating questions that many people wanted to know and needed to know. And I think sadly and unfortunately may have been vilified in the process for it. But her legacy lives on. DC is better for her life. And I truly extend my deepest condolences to her family and members of the Washington Teachers Union. So members, I am going to open it up. There is no format here. I'm not going to call. Feel free to jump in. We're going to do this in an orderly way. To just share brief remarks to honor the life and legacy. Auditor, please extend us grace, but I do think this is significant enough to give us some time to just recognize the icon that Liz Davis was. So members.
I just wanted to say, I only knew her for a short amount of time. President Davis first reached out to me last summer, I believe, after one of the public meetings. And she extended me an opportunity to speak at one of the town halls she was hosting. That was talking about inequities in education. And I truly loved that experience. And after that, she stayed in contact. And I was able to join the Washington Teachers Union, their Equity Collaborative Steering Committee. And so I met with her multiple times, and we texted. And she was a great person. I didn't know her very well, but I knew her well enough to know that anyone who was around her, anyone who was in her life, was just truly blessed. And it was heartbreaking to hear the news, because you never want anyone, especially someone like her, to go, and it's painful. I had a meeting with her last week, and it's just sad to think about. It's just sad to hear the news, but I hope that we can cherish her memory by fighting for teachers and doing what's right for our students in our education system. And I just know that she'll forever be an icon in DC, and there will always be another president of the teachers union, but there will never be another President Elizabeth Davis. So just want to say thank you. And I hope she rests well in heaven. So.
I'm going to follow Alex because we're on the other side of the spectrum. I knew Liz for over 40 years. We were on strike together in the early 70s. We were on strike together again in the late 70s or early 80s. Won one, lost one. She never changed. She was always an advocate for teachers. And if you're an advocate for teachers, you're an advocate for students. And if you're an advocate for teachers and students, you're an advocate for parents. And that was her whole life. And she was a very good friend of mine. And as everyone else was, it was like, it wasn't the kind of news that you wanted to hear at all. And I hope that we take up the mantle that Liz fought for all her life.
Jump in, Sheila.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if somebody had their hand raised before me. But following what Alex and Representative O'Leary was saying,
Shayla, you're breaking up.
I was replaced as an advocate as a whole person, and I did every part.
Okay, for the sake of time, members, someone feel free to jump in, and we'll let Shayla finish her statement when she gets back on.
I will. I just want to say that for a long time, I worked for the American Federation of Teachers, so I was familiar with the Washington Teachers Union. And the Washington Teachers Union, for those who don't know, was a storied local union. It was one of the very first unions in the American Federation of Teachers that integrated racially. So it was famous. I guess in the late 90s, went through a leadership change. And at a certain point, it was taken over by, as some of you know, by someone who was very corrupt, which was really far from the roots of this union. And it was a terrible, terrible thing. And it was followed by some more transition. And then by the union having to face off with a chancellor who came in, committed to the idea that the central problem in DC education was teachers, followed by quite massive terminations. And eventually a contract that is to this day, I think they hoped it would be a model, probably the one that, virtually the only one that takes tenure protections away from teachers. That is the world into which Liz Davis walked. It wasn't, as some people have said recently, this entrenched, powerful union. It was a union struggling to get back on its feet and represent teachers, and also, as other people have said, represent the kids. Because that's what teachers do, and teacher union leaders have to walk that line. This was a really, really tough year for her. It was tough for everybody in education, for families, for parents, for teachers, for teacher union leaders, for DCPS people, for all of us. And And again, she tried to walk this line between teachers who really were, and I don't think people sufficiently understand this, really scared to death about death, and a school district that wanted people, was really insistent that people need to go back to school, and some families on both sides. And, you know, she did it as well as anybody could have done. And I want to say one other thing, which speaks a lot to her. You know, the media often talks about union bosses, and I worked with a lot of union leaders, and most of them are not bosses. But in the case of Liz, nobody has said that. Nobody has talked about the union boss who died. Everybody has talked about the leader, and you see it in all of the responses and tributes to her, that the kind of democracy that she believed in her union, and the kind of openness that she wanted from everybody. So God bless you, Liz.
I'll quick if I may. I did not know President Davis, but what I will say is I arrived in DC with a little girl at a time when the union was going through a whole bunch. They had had a lot of things happen, and there wasn't a lot of respect for the teachers union at the particular time and sometime afterwards. What I will say is that what I appreciate about President Davis more so than anything is that she brought respectability and integrity and a lot of decency back to the teachers union and made them truly a relevant voice of the teachers that she represented. It wasn't political for her. It was about being fair and being right. And I always respect a person, whether I agree with you or not, that you're fighting for the right thing and for the integrity of the people that you represent and the children and the parents. And I just respected that so much. And then after her passing, so many of my friends whom I respect so much, people like Wanda Lockridge and other individuals who are part of my community, and to see them mourn so heavily and know that she had such an impact on their lives and what they do in my community, that she personally is the reason that they're fighting the way that they fight. You can't help but just admire President Davis for what she brought to this community, what she brought to the conversation, the integrity that she brought to the conversation, the rightness of it. I just have so much respect for that aspect of her tenure, of her life, her dedication. I've went back and actually read some about her activism that started at Eastern, and you just see somebody who is truly dedicated to people. And you have to respect that and you have to admire it. And that's what I got so much out of her, because I did not know her personally, and I can't say and reflect like others can, but I can say is she is a person that I seriously have went back and started to study even more because of how much respect I have for her and the way that she lived her life and how she represented people. So yes, thank you.
Members, feel free to just jump in.
Shayla, why don't you jump in again if you can? I want to give you your chance again.
Thank you. Sorry, guys, my connection cut out. And thank you, Ms. Thompson, for letting me know that cutting out the camera sometimes helps. But trying to pick up where I left off, I was basically just trying to get at the point that who she was as an advocate really reflected upon who she was as a person. And specifically, a experience I had with her was when she came to a student advisory council meeting where we talked about where we were talking about COVID, and she and any encounter I've ever had with her, she's always made the gesture out to Alex and I to help with whatever we need. And it honestly, any gesture she has made has never been an empty gesture, which is very rare to find as a student and trying to get your voice out there as a student. Sometimes it feels like gestures are empty or our voices are being put upon ears that aren't really open. And so I just really appreciated that and wanted to share that moment.
I'll go ahead. I was looking, I thought Ebony Rose was next. I was actually tracking because I'm that person. But similar to like what a lot of folks were saying, I think 2013 was my first year going over to DCPS. And even though I wasn't in the WTU, I was in the CSO, had my ear to the ground about the WTU elections. And I think that's when at least the name kind of came across, you know, my became knowledgeable for me. And then definitely, I think within this last year of the variety of events that were happening around between elections and then also happening around just the myriad of issues that we had going on between policing, between budgets, between the safety of schools. And I think that's where I really got to become more familiar with President Davis's voice. And she was just one of those people that you would just want to listen because she dropped gems constantly, I guess, along the way. I was actually similar kind of meeting. The Ward 8 Education Council met, the executive committee met yesterday, and we did a same kind of round robin where we all just kind of reflected on our thoughts about this tragic event. And something that came up, and I hope that this board could possibly hold with two things. One is one of the parents said, you know, a lot of adults are playing nicely at the expense of children. And I believe strongly that President Davis was able to do it both ways. She was able to vehemently dig her heels in on issues, but I feel like she never lost respect for the person across the table from her. And I think that's something, a characteristic worth holding high and keeping, because we really have to keep that rigor and standard of the issues that we are pressing for our children. And then the last piece of I will end with, I also have to throw in, I would just love the way that she would say President or Chancellor Farabee's name. When she mentioned, she would say Lewis. And it would just give me a kick, because similar, you know, when you have those elements going, but again, never lost the respect, but kept the standard there. But I will close with, you know, in our statement, the Ward 8 Education Council really leaned in on, you know, not just making a statement just to, you know, to reflect on her legacy, but to make it an action statement of, we really have to keep the level of advocacy going. I know the WTU feels a void in advocacy, especially around the budget and probably the education community in general. But, you know, for any folks listening, you know, if you truly are invested in education, join an advocacy group, testify at a hearing. Budgets are coming up, of course. Plan a community event in just your own community, anything, just to keep that spirit and fight alive. Thank you.
I'll jump in because it is a quiet moment in my house now. I've known Liz actually, I think since I was a kid. She taught at Sousa, which is my neighborhood school, but she taught my cousin. And I met her as an adult, a young adult, kind of an adult, trying to be an adult, after I came home from college. And my aunt was on the slate with her for the union. I make no apologies, and I never have, even when it was not popular or popular or accepted. That I come from a union family. The union is, I would say, and I hope we remember this period in time with COVID and everyone's like fears and our kind of renewed sense of like what it means to take care of yourself and what it means to take care of others. I think the union did some of its best work recently in reminding people why unions exist. Like unions exist because workers were abused. And we forgot that, I think, especially in DC, because unions for a period of time were under attack. And I feel like a lot of times people talk about like Liz being brave or Liz being a fighter or like how relentless she was. And they talk about it now, but I'm not so sure we did a great job of giving her her flowers while she was with us. I absolutely think Liz's life force was love. She loved teachers. She loved the union, even when that meant that, you know, she might have been moved around from school to school a little bit. She loved teaching, even when she started teaching in a part of the teaching profession that wasn't really open to women. It's a beautiful thing when someone can truly be a pioneer, because a lot of times when somebody goes first, the door closes behind them. And like Liz, like you can be first and you can end up a token. You can be first, you can end up a pariah. Or you can be first and like you can truly become like a pioneer and bring people with you. And Liz fought and she had the energy to bring people with her. So I have very much respect for her. I have absolute admiration and gratitude for her fortitude. And I absolutely hope to like, I look forward to leaning into celebrating what I see as her legacy as we start to unpack like her life and her contributions, because I think right now in particular, it's a really great time for us to learn from that and to lift up teachers as like servants and to lift up commitment. Like it's not a small, it was a dirty word to like be a teacher for 40 years. That was a bad thing at one point in time in DC, and Liz loved it and she lived it. And we love her for it. And so I'm sad to lose her now, but I'm grateful that we had her to lose.
Thank you, members, for these reflections. I know there are still members to go. Vice President Gasoy, Representative Chang, Representative Sutter. I know several of you have used the chat, and we also have space at the public meeting, but we will come back to reflections. I do want, just for the sake of time, to shift to the auditor because she does have a hard stop, and we want to make sure we allow space for her to share. And so with that, Auditor Patterson is here to speak about the recently released report on educational data that her office led. Auditor Patterson, we are glad to welcome you. And Ms. Roth, tonight, I believe you will be starting with an introduction to the report. And then from there, we will go to a short round of questions. Because the auditor has to leave us at 6, I'm going to propose that we do 2 rounds of questions. I know we had said before there'll be 1 round, but we will do 1 brief round of 2-minute questions if you have those specifically for the auditor. And then Ms. Roth has agreed to stay with us for a bit, and then we can do another round. So thank you for being flexible here. Also to members of the public, I just also want to elevate that Student Representative Dell is having technical difficulties. That is why she's off camera. And then Representative Sutter sadly is not feeling well today, and that is why she is off camera. But I do anticipate both of them participating. So with that, Auditor, I'm going to turn it over to you, but we're thrilled to have you tonight.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your reflections. I want to take exception with one thing that President Parker said about Liz Davis. He referred to her as being unflappable. I kind of remember her flapping. I feel like, maybe at me once or twice. And I just say that to say I admire her passion. And sometimes I think that's something we need more of in the work that we do. But thank you for letting us share in your reflections with each other. Erin Roth is our Education Policy Director at the Office of the DC Auditor, and we're going to talk about our lengthy education data audit, measuring what matters, more and better data needed to improve DC public schools. And we'll try to run through some of our findings pretty quickly and then get to conversation. And I think Erin's going to share a PowerPoint screen if she can figure out how to do that. So
I don't have permission just yet. I just tried, but if that's possible, or let me know if I should send it. Sorry.
Yes, I believe you now have the capability to share.
Okay, awesome.
It's magic.
Magic.
Thank you. So let me just start with going back to 2007. A couple of things happened that year. Obviously, the mayoral control legislation was enacted that year, the Public Education Reform Amendment Act. Part of that was creating the Office of the State Superintendent from what had been the State Education Office, but it became a much more comprehensive unit. One of the responsibilities given to the Office of the State Superintendent was to create a data warehouse, to really take over the issue of education data and to work with the Office of the Chief Technology Officer to create metrics that could be used for the process of continuous improvement. There also was a requirement in that legislation to do accountability reporting on what had transpired after the change in governance. And so in 2015, the final result of a major evaluation by the National Academy of Sciences and the National Research Council was a report that looked at DC, the public education system in the district. And one of their findings was, we need good data. We need comprehensive data, usable data, data that is accessible to the community. So when we took on doing this education data audit, it was not only statutorily required by 2018 legislation, it was also something that had been strongly recommended by the National Research Council report that came out in 2015. The legislation that had the authority for creation of a research practice partnership at the end of 2018 is a legislation that required us to do this audit, and we contracted with a firm of consultants, Data Ethics, to conduct this audit. And I'm going to just run through quickly some of the major findings of the audit, and then have Aaron turn to some of the ramifications. And these are really the top lines. We do not have a statewide longitudinal data system. Another thing that happened in 2007, we applied in the first round of federal SLDS grant funding and were awarded one of the first SLDS grants. We were awarded a second grant in 2012. We've spent a total of something like $35 million, 10 million in the two federal grants and 25 in DC capital dollars on improving our information technology, but we still do not have a system that is statewide and longitudinal. We also find that the OSSE has not fulfilled its mandate as a state agency. They've chosen not to collect certain critical data from all of our schools in order to fulfill all of the requirements of an SLDS. Without that kind of comprehensive data collection, use, and analysis, we're not really able to look at learning loss. We're not really able to look at racial equity in the way that we should be able to. We also raise concerns with the validity of some of the data that's currently in use in publications. And we are concerned and shared concerns that we might be out of compliance with some of the federal government's data requirements. We submit a lot of information to the federal government, some of which we submit and then don't make available publicly. And let me turn for the next part to Aaron to go through what we do and what we don't do with data.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And just a quick thank you for being able to hear all of your reflections. I appreciate just being here in this moment with all of you and hearing that. Very grateful. So as Kathy mentioned, I'll start with things that we don't yet collect in the district, and this is this list is produced by the federal statewide longitudinal grant program at the Department of Education. And you can see there's a lot of red on this table. And the things that we do not collect, the red all the way across, are student courses, credits, and grades. teacher student links. So being able to tell across the entire district which teacher is the teacher of record for which student. And then information on student supports. And that is kind of a new frontier in statewide longitudinal data systems, but it includes things like school climate survey data or PBIS type of supports, or response to intervention, RTI, or multi-tiered systems of supports, MTSS, or whatever is used at the LEA level across the state. And next, there's a lot on this table that is a little bit red and a little bit yellow, but not all the way green, right? So this includes things that we collect only in part are student enrollment. Unfortunately, we found that the OSSE student enrollment data was missing end of year exit codes in approximately 80% of records. And enrollment is, like a front parentheses and a back parentheses for entry and exit. That makes complete enrollment. If you're missing one of those, then you don't have complete enrollment. Enrollment by program type, that's like things like dual language or career and technical education programs, specialized tracks within a school. Student attendance and discipline, a fair amount of teacher data, early childhood, CTE and adult education data, and then post-secondary workforce and other sector data that is often linked to education data. These are things we collect only in part. And then as Kathy mentioned, there's quite a bit of data that we collect or that we have, but don't share or report. And this includes quite a bit of teacher data that we are required to report to the federal government every year. And that's not shared in full with, and I don't mean individual teacher data, but school level teacher data, for example, on school report cards. The civil rights data collection, you can go to the civil rights data collection website. I pulled this one picture, one screenshot from OCR's website to give you an example. But one of the provisions of ESSA was that CRDC data be shared and reported locally. So that's not something that we're yet doing. This is an example of, there's so much there from staffing and finance and student supports and course access. This shows algebra enrollment in grades 7 or 8, and you can see across this LEA that there is, in 2017, there was no enrollment in algebra in grade 7 or 8. And then post-secondary persistence and graduation, those are data that we have a contract with the National Student Clearinghouse that links over 90% of post-secondary student data back to K-12 data. And right now we're collecting but not reporting on persistence or graduation. As you can imagine, there are a lot of real life impacts for schools and teachers and students with better data. If teachers in particular have access to data looking forward and data looking back for every class or cohort, and certainly for every student looking backwards, that can really help guide instruction both at the classroom level, at the school level, a program level, or for LEAs. And importantly, this impact is not because I have the data. It's not because researchers have the data. It's because teachers have it. It's because school principals have it. The people who need to see real, live, actionable, and meaningful data have it when they need it. And that is a typical function of a statewide longitudinal data system that you have access. One thing that we've been asked a lot about is, well, can't some of these things just be created at the LEA level? And no, they can't. So a statewide longitudinal data system must be at statewide, must be at the statewide level. And then a lot of the data use that you get out of that must also be at the statewide level. And in fact, cannot be created by LEAs. And so it's unfair to LEAs and to schools to assume that they can create the same tools without statewide data. These are some quick screenshots. I know that's probably very hard to see what's on all of them, but there's a picture on the left that's from Washington State, and this shows students 12 years after graduation and their post-secondary persistence graduation degrees earned and their earnings. So they're following students every year after they graduate from any public school in Washington State. The small one in the middle is from Arkansas. This was one of the many graphs I could have pulled about teachers across the state of Arkansas. This happens to be teacher experience by race ethnicity. But you can look at licensures, even exemptions from licensures, how those fall out across LEAs and schools across the whole state. And then the one on the right is from Montana. This is something that every teacher has access to in Montana, every teacher of middle school or high schooler. And it gives both prior data for each student on attendance, grades, credit, student mobility, and behavior. And then looks forward to make predictions using all of that prior data and using other student data across the state to make predictions about how your student will do and if they need any additional interventions or supports. And there's a picture here of where you can find our additional testimony. We created 3 additional data products for this testimony to show what we could do right now in DC with what we have. And the first one here is just an example. These are all demos. So there's not real student data on these right now, but this is just to show education stakeholders across the district what we could have right now but don't have. So one thing that's pretty common is that each teacher would have their own access point to an SLDS in their state and would be able to produce these snapshots of longitudinal student information for each student. So if you have 25 students in your class, you would have 25 of these that would show their trajectory across the last 3 years. And if you notice, there's not just information about demographics and at-risk status and 504 EL status, these sorts of categories, but there's also subclaim information, which is something that teachers typically find very helpful to know, not just how you did on PARCC, but how your proficiency level on each of the unique subclaims within the math and ELA PARCC tests. The next one, we created an early warning system with a synthetic student. So this is not a real student's probability of high school success, but it does use actual DC data to produce these probabilities. So the graph that you see on the left, that's real DC probabilities of being on track for high school success. And that used PARCC math and ELA test scores, special education, English language learner status, at-risk status, absenteeism, behavior, and mobility, as these are the things that we found to be most predictive of high school success later for students across the district. And what's interesting about this one is this synthetic student that we created is at moderate risk of not being on track for high school success. But you might not otherwise notice that because their test scores and other indicators don't really raise significant flags, perhaps, at the classroom or school level. But with this additional modeling where you can interweave the data and use it to make predictions, it would say, hey, actually, wait a second, there's enough things here that we need to provide additional supports and intervention. This last one is a high school feedback report. These are actually the most in-demand product from state education agencies to local education agencies across the country. And they give a picture of what incoming students, what your 8th graders looked like coming into each high school. And then how they do while they're in high school and how do they do when they leave your high school. So it's like it's a full 360-degree picture for each high school. And these are publicly reported by the SEA. We wanted to highlight just a few places where in the audit, the State Board of Education comes up. First, in the recommendations, we recommend that OSSE develop a formal data governance structure. And for it on the steering committee, we suggest multiple folks from different agencies who should be involved. And one of those is a State Board of Education representative. We also recommend that the State Board regularly evaluate the metrics included in school report cards for stakeholder responsiveness to help determine when report cards need to be updated. As this is one of our findings about engagement and adjustment based on, or lack thereof, based on what stakeholders most want in the district on report cards. And then there's a lot in here that is relevant for research use that we think is very important for the RPP advisory committee moving forward. And I know you all have elected Dr. Reed to be the representative. Congratulations, Dr. Reed. And there's just a lot in here that is of use for anyone using these data to make inferences and research that requires assumptions. There's a lot of important caveats and limitations until we get things fully collected. Kathy, turn it back to you.
Thank you. So next steps, you probably know that the chairman had a committee of the whole hearing on this audit, and the acting superintendent provided quite a lot of testimony. One of the things that she said that was very good to hear was that they do intend to do course collections to collect that information, which is an incredibly demanding piece of work that will require, I think, a new information system, which itself is probably going to be a costly capital expenditure if they move in that, if the OSSE moves in that direction. So one of the things to be looking for is what happens in the mayor's budget proposal, particularly for OSSE, particularly for capital. We're hoping to see some kind of an additional investment of district capital dollars in order to try to get to where we need to be in terms of a statewide longitudinal system. There's also a search underway for a new state superintendent. There will be a confirmation hearing before the council, so another opportunity to talk about how a new state superintendent sees this issue moving forward. Again, council budget hearings on, well, you mentioned it for your budget, but also for OSSE's budget. There is also a piece of legislation that Councilmember Che introduced that reflects a lot of the recommendations made in the audit report itself to start requiring certain data collections and to start requiring the use of those data collections. So a lot of moving pieces going forward. And we will be continuing to talk about this audit and talk about the different steps that need to be taken and sort of how to get from here to there in terms of having the kind of data collection and use that we really do need. So let me stop there and say we're happy to take your questions. I'll take the easy ones, Aaron will take the hard ones, but happy to get into a dialogue.
Thank you, Auditor. Members, we are going to make one more adjustment. We're going to go back to the original plan and just do one round of 3-minute questions. Auditor Patterson, we appreciate you joining us. We know you have to leave early, so you'll answer as many as you can while you're here. And then
just the easy ones first.
Just the easy ones. Unfortunately, we have to go in order, and so
no.
Who knows how that will go. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hayworth to call the roll.
Thank you. Dr. Sutter.
Thank you, Mr. Hayworth. I appreciate the chance to ask a question. Thanks so much, Auditor Patterson and Aaron. I really appreciate having you both here. My question is about, I appreciate the State Board recommendations sort of writ large on what we should do around data. what I'm curious about is I watched the hearing and I watched you all talk in detail about what you'd like to see in a data system. And then I heard Asi give a very different perspective of what is in the data system. So having been a few weeks removed from it with some time to think and reflect, if the state board were to sort of push on some of these elements that are missing, that are present in other states, keeping in mind the student population size of some other states, so like comparable more to Vermont or Wyoming's data system than say Washington state's with millions of students, what would you suggest we push on in terms of advocacy for additional elements to be added to the data system?
I mean, I'm a very practical person, and so I would work with what Ms. Young said she was planning already. And she did talk about the course collection, all that information on courses. And that's certainly as good a place to start as any, but quite candidly and pragmatically, if you're going to invest in collecting course data, you're going to need to make some expenditures. You're going to need to do some of them. Really, the first step that you need in order to have a statewide longitudinal system, which is, and we recommend in the report, an off-the-shelf statewide information system for an SEA. Some of our LEAs have their own SISs that are LEA designed, but again, practically speaking, I would push there because there's already an awareness, an acknowledgement that this is important and something that they say, well, we're thinking about how to do it. That's where I would start.
My second question then is, looking at other states, you know, there are things that states can do with economies of scale and cost. And my sense is that data systems are just expensive and that being smaller doesn't make them less expensive. Is that accurate? And are there things that are particularly difficult for us, given the size of our jurisdiction, in terms of what we can get for our money?
The things that Aaron talked about, those last 3 data products, we built those after the hearing, after the testimony, had our principal investigator sort of say, well, with what you have today, here's what you could do. That's another thing to, I think, to push for, that without a great expenditure, other than perhaps the staff time to do it, we could build a rudimentary early warning system with what we have. And I think, again, one of the things that Shani Young said was, okay, we will do a better job of releasing the teacher data that we have. We will do a better job of using the post-secondary data that we have, which can then do some of that student tracking post-high school, the high school readout reports that are another one of those products Aaron was pointing to. So that's another thing that I think we could really push for without a huge expenditure.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. My time is up.
Dr. O'Leary.
This is a very controversial report because people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. What can we do to make sure that people do what they're supposed to do? Because this, it seems to me, just from, I don't know anything about data and reports and things like that, but just looking at that PowerPoint presentation, it looks horrible. It's embarrassing that there's hardly any data that's gathered. What kind of feedback did you get after you gave the report from the system itself? Because it's the system's fault.
I think there's great resistance on the part of the executive to accept where we are today. I mean, one of the statements, I mean, sometimes they have said, we do too have a system. Well, there's a system, but it's not statewide, it's not longitudinal. And so part of moving forward is understanding where you're moving from. Where are we today? And I think it's going to be really critical to get people to be very clear and straightforward about what we have. And I would encourage the state board to really push on those things that we could be doing now. And you know, from your constituencies and the folks you deal with and work with and hear from, what would be most important of this menu of things that need to be done. And I would just encourage you to listen to that, what you're hearing from the grassroots, and push on those things.
One of these signs behind me was in my classroom, and it says, those who are afraid to ask for help usually wind up needing it. And it seems to me like the system really needs help, but they ignore the cries in the woods. So I think that's what our job must be, is to start screaming.
I would
And
agree with that, but
I really appreciate this report. I mean, I'm sad that that it looks the way it does, but you know, all the talk in the world isn't going to change the facts that the information isn't there.
and I would encourage you to make common cause with the council members. Those of you that represent wards with your ward member and everyone with your at-large members and with the chairman, and just try to be partners there to say, okay, you heard all about this. This was done at your requirement in the law. You know, how can we together work to have OSSI be what it needs to be?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Reed.
Thank you. So I'll lead with, I have not dug into this report the way I really want to, but I still have questions. So did the system called SLED, did that come up at all? Okay, and so you're saying that that's in place, but it's missing the elements that have the red, green, and yellow. Okay, that are needed. Okay, cool. And then, okay, shifting gears then. So what are the benefits that the other states who, the examples that you provided, have mentioned in regards to having that information, the information that, like, you know, because it's like a nice to have and a need to have. And I also know there's, like, you know, a price tag associated with it, which is fine. But, you know, I would hate for us to build a glamorous system. And at the end of the day, it's what you do with data, in my opinion. So what have those states said are the benefits of having all of that information? I guess what have they done or pivoted with it?
I think one of the reasons we tried to show actual data products was to answer that question. So everyone now is concerned about learning loss because of COVID. One of the things that we showed from, I think, the state of Montana was a sort of a piece of information on every one of your students. And if you're going into a classroom in the fall, and you could have that kind of data that tells you exactly where each of your 25 students has been for the last 3 years, what courses, what grades, what issues, what social supports. If you had that, you could really know where to start with your students in terms of addressing learning loss. So that's one of the kinds of things that having a statewide and a longitudinal system, statewide, it would capture, no matter where the kid is, the previous whatever years, would capture the information, and longitudinal would be able to project it over time. So we're trying to show in some of these actual things you can look at, these data products, well, this is what you could have with a sophisticated system. And then the second set were, this is what you could have now without as much data, but it still gives you markers to go on. And with that, I'm going to have to apologize and depart, but I'm leaving you with a person who can answer the easy and the hard questions.
Okay, I'll use 40. Thank you. I'll use 40 seconds. And again, because I didn't. So then what happened? So 2019, there was a talk of almost building a birth through whatever beyond system. What happened, Erin?
Yeah, there's been talk of creating these systems since 2007. So certainly there are obstacles. I think the trick there is all states have faced obstacles in this work. It's not easy, and while DC is unique, I am there. love to talk about the special parts of the district, but this is not one of those things. So you asked too about is this a luxury item or is this a basic necessity? And this is now having these data for all students across the district and using it we're not talking about a Lexus anymore. This is your basic Toyota and everybody else has it. So.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roth. Dr. Gasoy.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions. So one is just, you had mentioned that there's some data that we have, but it's not being shared. So I'm just interested to know if you have any insight into why, and just if that's something that we should be prioritizing since it's there in terms of advocacy. But I'm also wondering, I know in their rebuttal that OSSI sort of framed this as, you know, their agency being one that's young and growing. So I'd like your sort of your response to that, and particularly around whether you think there is a trajectory of growth, if you saw that in your research, and if there are areas where you saw it more, and areas of data collection where it's really just, well, you showed us where it was totally lacking. But if you saw growth, if that's like a sound argument.
Yes, absolutely. We did add a little bit more of this in our response to agency comments at the very end of the report. Is where the agency comments and then our response goes. So if you make it to page 290, you will find it. And we did try to note where progress has been made. Absolutely, progress has been made. And a couple, even during the audit, actually, there were a few things that changed after repeated questions and pushing for more documentation and asking where this data collection is and who owns it and what is the reporting. And that gets back to your first question on sharing data that we do collect. One of those things that we did see improvement on was the collection and ownership of teacher data. It used to be collected by TNTP directly from LEAs, and OSSI did not continue that contract. There is still an insight survey for many teachers, but the actual data collected from each school on our public school teachers is now publicly owned by the district at OSSI. So that's a big improvement. And I think the State Board of Ed has done a lot of work to that end around teachers and can push for more data use, knowing exactly what's there and exactly what we own and submit to the feds.
I yield my time.
Thank you, Dr. Kasoy. Ms. Thompson.
Hi, Erin. I'm happy to see you. And I know you can't answer all of the questions. I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around what is like what you would recommend is like most urgent. Like if there are things that are like, I heard Ms. Patterson say, like, lean on your council members, right? Like, what are the things that are most urgent? And then what are the things that, if you are getting pushback from the executive, who can accomplish what? Because I know that's always a patchwork in our governance system. Yeah.
Thank you. And this is one of those questions that probably Kathy does better than me, so we can always follow up there. But in terms of urgency, I would say data use is the most urgent. And like I mentioned, the state board has motivated a lot of data use already, particularly around teacher data and teacher retention and the teacher survey. But the more that we can ask for actual analysis and use to meet stakeholder demand, the better. If we don't use data, then our data collections do not improve. And there's no real point in having a whole bunch of fancy things in a box if we never use it. And why would you have fancy things in a box if you never use it? So most states have had a lot of obstacles in this work and improved slowly, iteratively over time through typically legislatively required data use. So I would look to a couple of the reports, the data use that is in Councilmember Che's legislation, see what you think. Interact with that, get back to her. But that type of data use is what's going to push us to better data collection.
That's really helpful. I think that's my full question. I think the thing I'm thinking about is if you said that entry level is a Toyota and everybody else has a Toyota, this is not a Lexus. We don't have a Toyota. What do we have? Like what? What do we have? That's a little scary.
Yes. Yeah, unclear. I don't want to take the analogy too far to like a bike share because I don't know where I'm going with that. But we have pieces and parts. We don't have a whole car.
Okay. So we're gonna build the car. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you, members. Are there additional questions before I, Ms. Wattenberg?
Sorry, I thought we were waiting to be called on was my impression. I didn't realize thought there was some order that I didn't know about. Anyway, first of all, thank you very much, Erin, and thanks to Kathy who's gone for doing this. It was tremendously enlightening and it's so important. So to me, there's a lot of reasons for data. You've talked about them, but using it to understand what's happening and what is working well and what is not working well so we can improve it is really important. That is true anywhere. I think it's especially true here in DC, where we pride ourselves on being a city of choice. And, you know, an entire sector, the charter sector is really built in part on the idea that there's going to be innovations and we can see them, and when they work, we can replicate them. And we all sort of complain a lot about how there's not a lot of back and forth between those systems, but it strikes me that to some extent, this is part of the problem. We haven't talked about it, but this is just plain weird. And I don't even understand it, is apparently, and I'm curious also if anybody else does this, but the different LEAs make their own decisions about what the definition is of attendance, what the definition is of certain discipline terms, I think suspension, and submit reports based on that. So we can't even do apples to apples comparisons across our schools. And I guess my question is, one, do I understand that properly? It seems really extreme. And is there anywhere else where this happens that LEAs could make their own decisions about what data to collect and how to define it?
Yeah, that I don't think so, to answer that your second question first. And what's happening now is not that LEAs are making their own definitions and everybody, you know, running in different directions, but there's not enough controls over the option sets that OSSI provides around attendance for LEAs to use. And LEAs each have different defaults in their own student information system. So a lot of times, like the interaction between those defaults and the options that they're given could be creating variation. And this is really where I think we need to ask OSSI, you know, what can you do to tighten this up and make sure that everything you're getting is following the same rules? Because clearly it's not with you know, the very basic, we took the difference between two variables that should be the same and they're not the same. So I would bring that question back to them, but I want to, I guess, reinforce that this isn't the LEA's fault. They're submitting a lot of data using parameters given to them by OSSI.
Yeah, and to clarify my understanding, it's not that people have different definitions, it's that there's so many loopholes in the definitions and not the controls over the collection. The result being people use different definitions, I guess would be the way to say it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wattenberg.
Can I just say one other thing before I yield, which is just to say, you know, those of us who have worked on a lot of the teacher retention over the years really did regard it as very odd that the only people who collected the teacher retention data was a private contractor. So I really, I just want to give you a special hand of applause for, you know, just sort of bringing that to light. And as a result, it is ended. And also, somebody mentioned Councilwoman Shea's legislation, which is going to includes a lot of the work that we have tried to do in terms of creating legislation that would get the teacher data public and transparent and available. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Members, I see no additional hands. Are there additional questions before Mr. Parker, or excuse me, President Parker finishes this up?
I've got one. Hi, Erin. And I've been trying to think about how to phrase it, but what I guess just very bluntly, why do you think how do we get here, right? Is it that there's not enough resources and they're doing the best that they can do? Is it deliberately steering the data to show something that they want to show with the existing data that we have? What is your take on the motivation behind this lack of data?
It is always the number one question I get with any audit. Why, Erin? Why is this happening? And I apologize because I can't really answer it. We don't audit the why. I would offer that this particular audit is of a system that is really a long-term investment. While you can absolutely, we're showing you, data products that you could have and use right now. There's also a lot of work that, elected officials may not see the result of within their tenure, right? And so those things always, I think, tend to be put on the back burner to some extent. So now we're at a point of urgency, I believe, around the collection and use of data in service of students, teachers, and schools in the district that I hope that it is no longer put on the back burner.
And I'll use my time to ask what Carlene put in the chat, which is how I start calling them the Toyota states too. The Toyota states are doing with student outcomes.
Yeah, this is a really good question because, data and data use is not a magic pill that makes our students do better, our schools more successful. It doesn't work that way. What we have seen in some states is that data use has spurred additional oversight and monitoring and legislation and resources. So if you can tie, analysis to something else to get some more legs of the stool, then you do see things happening. One example is an analysis in North Carolina that looked at access to advanced math coursework for middle school and high schoolers, and found out that we were in North Carolina, those courses were not being equitably distributed to students based on prior achievement. We found the same thing in DCPS, by the way, in the audit. So there was legislation that said, you have to fix this. We have this result. You have to ensure that it gets better. And researchers went back and checked a few years later and did not find the same pattern anymore. Now, obviously, they're still working on stuff in North Carolina. I'm from North Carolina. There's still some things, right? But, tying data use to oversight and resources is key.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roth. President Parker.
I first want to level set before I get to my question. The report says DC is not collecting this data, is not meeting federal regulations. The DC education agency said, yes, we are, and we are meeting requirements. And so this is part of the frustration that I know a lot of parents and educators feel, that we are hearing conflicting messages. Can we just level set for a second? And specifically, is it safe to say, yes, DC education agencies may be meeting the bare minimum requirements, but that there are other aspects that we are not collecting? Or would you challenge the assertion that we are meeting federal regulations?
Where we landed in the audit after discussing with the executive is flagging where we found that we are at risk of being out of compliance with federal reporting requirements. So that risk exists right now.
Understood. And so what I extract from that is, while we may be meeting whatever metrics of compliance, it seems bare minimum, and we could be doing a lot more in terms of collecting data and then using that data. I want to get to my question. In the report, you talk about how OSSI outsources a lot of its data collection. Representative Wattenberg just spoke about one instance of that. There seems to be a philosophical disagreement between the auditor's office and how OSSI views this data collection. OSSI seeing it as it needs to be at the LEA level, and it seeming you all are suggesting this needs to be at the state level or at OSSI's level. Can you just talk about some of the consequences of this data collection happening at the LEA level?
Sure. We will not be able to have an early warning system, for example.
Yeah.
Teachers won't be able to have, instant access to student longitudinal data in the way that they do have in other states.
And I hate to interrupt, Erin, but I'm looking at the clock.
Sure.
And so one of my main criticisms of DC educational governance, if you will, or our approach is that we double down on accountability without the support. We are not doing a good enough job of supporting our schools, our LEAs. Would you agree with the assertion that if we were to collect the data that your report is suggesting we should be collecting at the state level, that would allow us to support LEAs in a more comprehensive way, along the lines of maybe Massachusetts and their statewide school support system?
500%, yes.
I figured you would say that. I'm gonna later, thank you for coming. Later, I'm gonna talk about our proposed resolution, but I think there is this link between collecting this data and how we better support our schools that I don't know if it was elevated enough in the conversations that I saw at the council or in the report, but I really appreciate the report and you pushing on this issue.
Thank you.
And so with that, it seems that we have concluded our time with the auditor's office. Erin, again, many thanks for your hard work on this report, but also joining us tonight. Please send our best to Auditor Patterson as well. We really appreciate it. And we will be sure to follow up if we have additional questions.
Sounds good. Thank you all.
Thank you. Members, before moving forward to our committee reports and work plans, I did want to circle back to provide additional space for reflections, understanding that 3 members did not get a chance to speak. So no pressure to speak, but I did want to provide this opportunity for Vice President Gasoy, Representative Sutter, Representative Chang to jump in. And again, I'm not going to call on anybody, just feel free to jump out there.
Go ahead, Jessica.
All right, I'll jump in quickly. So I was very shocked to see the news on about President Davis, and my first real encounter with her was at the Bowling vs. Sharp 50th anniversary event that Learn Together, Live Together held at Sousa Middle School. I heard her speak on the panel and talk about her own experience with her Sousa students and her experience as an Eastern High School Rambler here in Ward 6, and got to chat with her afterwards in the lobby at Sousa. And it was wonderful. It was just wonderful and refreshing to recognize that she had brought all of the work that she had done from her first years as a teacher in DCPS, that same level of energy, that same level of commitment all the way through. So that's, I think, what will stick with me, is that there was a real consistency in her energy and her activism. And I certainly admire it and was inspired by it. And it's very hard to imagine that she's not going to be with us anymore and not part of this city's educational landscape, because clearly she did a great deal in her 40+ years in the system and brought that level of energy consistently throughout. So thank you for letting me speak.
Well, I'll say that this was a really hard one for me. It's not news you want to hear about anyone, of course. But this one, I still feel flattened by it, you know? Liz was just, you know, I wrote in the chat, I never have met somebody who has a stronger life force or had a stronger life force than she did. That's what I thought of when I heard the news, was just like, how is that possible? because her energy and her presence is so powerful. It's just kind of unfathomable to imagine that it's not with us anymore. And I think it is still with us. I think that's a reality. But, you know, something that has really struck me over the last several days is just how many people have noted that they had just heard from her or just spoken with her or had made a plan with her, or, you know, that they had received a text with, you know, like outlining this plan, or she just had amazing energy. And it's funny, somebody sent me that picture that I posted of us that I love. It's so candid. And you can see Liz telling a story, right? She was always telling a story. And my mom saw that picture and she was like, she's so young, you know, she's your age. And I was like, no, but she was so young, right? Like she just was ageless and her energy was boundless. And she, you know, she just really walked the walk. You know, she was all about democracy and grassroots. And she brought in so many people. She was constantly reaching out. As Alex said, she reached out to students, she reached out to families, she reached out to teachers. I'm going to miss her so much. She was an amazing person and her legacy is, you know, long and deep. So I look forward to talking about her a lot over the next month or year or whatever. So, and I'm glad that we'll be honoring her legacy at our public meeting.
Thanks, everyone. I would just add that for me, I've known of Liz because she has been one of the biggest champions of school libraries and school librarians for many years, and was in the middle of, when we lost her, another round of efforts to stop the cut of school libraries in DC, and you know, really help people see what school librarians actually do within schools, not take the stereotype of them as cataloging repositories of books, which is, I think, too often what people think school librarians' main focus is still these days, right? And so for me, I didn't, I just wanted to highlight that for my world in the library space, she's been also, it's a big loss.
Thank you, members. The life and legacy of Elizabeth Davis truly lives on. She was a neighbor, a friend, a mentor, educator, an advocate, and the list goes on and on. And so, again, we extend our condolences to our family and members of the Washington Teachers Union. It's hard to transition after that, but we will move on to our committee work plans. In our agenda, it is my understanding that the Student Advisory Committee is also prepared to share recommendations. So Representative O'Sullivan and Dale, why don't we have you all go first? And then in terms of the committees, we can, we'll call on the chairs to share, and how we will do this. For our student representatives, we will not give you a time, but just be mindful of time, I will ask. For other committees, we will provide you 5 minutes to share out about your work plans. We will open up the floor for 5 minutes for questions or comments. When everyone is completed with the share out about committee work plans, Mr. Hayworth will then provide us an overview of the Gantt chart that he's put together. I know there has been some behind the scenes conversations around timelines and committees and how all of this aligns, but then that will be an opportunity for us to get a high level view of our work from now until the end of the year. And so that is how we'll spend this next chunk of time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our student representatives to share out on your recommendations.
Okay, thank you, President Parker. John Paul, do you want to share your screen to show what we have, or I have it pulled up, so I can
if you want to just talk through it, Alex, I think that's probably good, and we'll put it on Assembly for everyone to see.
Okay, perfect. So I'll let Shayla get to the to some of the things besides like the core recommendations. So basically, and I think Representative Thompson was at this meeting, but we came to consensus that we'd like to recommend that we increase the amount of student representatives to 4, with at least 1 representative that attends a school, high school east of the river. And so that's a requirement. And obviously the prospective representatives, we still want them to be either sophomores, juniors, or seniors, because the Student Advisory Committee members felt pretty adamant about making sure that the people representing us on the board have had some of that experience in their high school first before they take up one of those slots. And they also said there should be no more than 1 representative per school. And we did not require this last part, but it is something we want you all to keep in mind when you all are voting on student representatives. But there should be a priority placed on the selection of student representatives that reflect a diversity of student experience. So including graduating class, ward, school size, types of schools as well. It's really important you all, when you are looking at student representatives, look at like the cohesive body that you all will put together. For example, it's probably not best practice to vote to have 4 seniors to be student representatives, or 3 seniors and 1 junior. It may not be what's best for the committee going forward. So we did not require that there's a certain number of seniors, juniors, or sophomores. But personally, I think something you all could do is, you all are going through this process, you all could meet to figure out what would give the student rep position and the student advisory committee the strongest leadership. So really examining what each potential student rep could provide to the board and also to the committee from a variety of like leadership standpoints, what their skills are, if they are primarily like great at just like working, or if it's outreach, whatever it may be, it's something you all should consider. And then the last thing before Shayla can go is we wanted to recommend that you all take ownership to ensure every high school principal knows, and not just that they receive it, but that they know what this is, and they know like that this is the student representative position on the State Board of Education. It's important that as many students as possible hear about this. And something all of the committee members were adamant about is that we're not just trying to get the students to perform the best academically. So we don't want like the exceptional student from each school. We really want the students who will do the best job possible. And that goes beyond what their grade point average is. Shayla, do you want to talk about the application process and then also the other recommendation we have?
Sure. So with what Alex was saying, we also had the recommendation for every resolution considered by the State Board of Education for the creator of the resolution to actually come to the Student Advisory Committee to explain the purpose and reasoning of the resolution, which would really just give the Student Advisory Committee good understanding of what's actually going on within the State Board of Education. Not only that, but kind of connect the 2 bodies. So, you know, we're on the same page. And also, so we could have more student voice within what's going on within the State Board of Education. As far as the application process goes, we wanted to have the the application being in two parts put into consideration. So for students who simply want to be on the student advisory committee but not serve as a student representative, they would simply fill out their name, email, contact number, school, grade. And then for student representatives, they would be given short answer questions that have been given in the past, that I know Alex and I have filled out, basically explaining their extracurriculars, why they want to be a student representative, what they feel they will bring to the State Board of Education, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and just to add on to Shayla on that last point, especially with the application, we really want to make sure that you all get a good grasp of what, for the student that's applying, we don't just want them to say all the things they've done, but we really want to see what they can do and what they can bring to the committee. And like I said earlier, whether that's outreach, whether that's just working to do maybe the more menial tasks, it's important that you all know and you all think about the committee. The student rep position is not just like for individuals, but as one group and one leadership group of the student advisory committee as well, because we're trying to do an impossible task of representing the entire city. And it doesn't matter how many students you have, it's already difficult enough to do that. So it's really important you guys think about the cohesiveness of the committee, but that's pretty much our recommendations. And we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you all. Members, are there any questions for the student reps? Not seeing any. I will ask one.
Mr. President, I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thompson has her hand up, sir.
Oh, I am sorry. Representative Reed.
And Reed.
Okay, let me get it together. So what, Alex and Shayla, could you respond or refresh me as to why the number 4?
Yeah, so initially and I know Representative Thompson probably remembers this, students thought like in an ideal world, 8 would be best, like 1 for each ward. But obviously there would be some issues with that. Not just there would be too many people and the state board meetings, but also like it would be difficult to lead the committee as well with 8 different leaders. I personally, there's a club I do for my school and we have a leadership group of like 4 people. I think it works great. I think 4 is a really good number. But also in terms of like diversity in wards, the idea is if you have 4, you can obviously get 1 from 7 and 8, but also try to make sure you're getting some from different types of schools. So if you're gonna get some from like Basis or Duke Ellington, which may not be the traditional high school experience for everyone, it's important you get like the larger high schools, the more traditional public schools, whatever it may be, so that you're not just getting 4 magnet schools, you're not just getting like all of the public schools are a certain type of school pretty much. So that's kind of the reasoning for 4.
Thank you, I'm done.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. And I know we have the timer here. We are gonna suspend expectations for time for the student representatives and the administrative committee. But just to clarify, we will have 5 minutes total for discussion after the committee work plans, not 5 minutes per member. So just wanna set expectations there. But Representative Thompson.
Okay, I think I'm actually confused now, but I'll just be as concise as possible. I don't know if I have a question. I have a comment. I think you all did wonderful work. Thank you for letting me kind of sit and to watch you work. I think my thing was like, don't go negotiate against yourself. Like, ask for what you want. And you all did a great job. I am particularly, yes, I still have a house phone. I am particularly excited about the idea of making sure there's an East of the River rep. And I think, and I really like the recommendation about us coming to you all to make sure you are looped into what's happening with the board. That makes a lot of sense to me because that's actually like true engagement. And it holds us accountable to get your feedback. So I really appreciate that showing up. So just kudos all the way around, Alex and Shayla. You all are always super impressive. I'm glad to have you on the board, and I look forward to seeing, who comes next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Patterson.
Yes, thank you. As I listen to the conversation thus far, and knowing that we have almost an evenly divided constituency of students between charters and traditional schools, I wanted to hear a little bit more of the thought process in trying to get more charter students to apply, or how that thought process, if there was conversation around that. I don't believe there's been very many charter representatives. If you could give me a little insight into if that was a conversation or brought up.
Sure. So while that was not a conversation particularly brought up or prioritized, I think the thing at the forefront for us regarding the student advisory committee, as well as, just being student reps, is really getting accurate representation and including people east of the river. I think that that is a valid point to be brought up, but I think what we really want to focus on, being that we've struggled with it for so long, is getting, participation, engagement, and representation from east of the river.
And I'll also add on, I think there is something to be said about, like, obviously, we didn't say any specifics on, like, it has to be a public versus public charter. It is something for you all to consider. So our entire goal, and we didn't explicitly state this, but our goal in terms of you all looking at the body of who you all choose to select as student representatives, is that you all put together a group that you all, one, thinks like best represents the city, but two, will also serve the student advisory committee well. So there are going to be a number of things you all want to include. We chose not to do charter schools because I'll personally say, as a charter school student myself, I do feel like we tend to be represented enough. And I'd like to, and I like to see more DCPS schools represented in the process. But that is to say, we're definitely not excluding charter versus public school.
And I did see, just to follow up, I did see Representative Thompson's comment as far as there has been represented. I just wanted to make sure that the process was very equitable in the sense of how it was performed and that everybody had the same availability. Now, you can't make somebody apply to be on the board, of course, and I know that. But I just wanted to make sure that the process was available to all students and that it was fair. You get what you get who apply, and you try to make sure it's equitable. So I appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Patterson. Yes, the process is fair. There is no election rigging at the state board. Are there any other questions for our student reps? Vice President Gasor.
So first, just thank you for this. I think all of the ideas are good. I love the idea of having more reps. First of all, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think ensuring that we have a rep from east of the river is great, and staggering makes total sense. And thank you for pushing us to, make a more robust effort to reach out to principals. So Jacques, actually, that's like, a good answer to your question. But my question, I guess, you were mentioning, Alex, that you want us, when we're choosing representatives, to make sure that, or to think about compatibility, right? And, to think about the skills that some students have, and not just to look at academic achievement, which I appreciate as well. Are you planning to, or do you already have sort of an outline of, based on your insights from your experience, what should we be looking for? Like, what skills have you needed to apply? What do you think we should be looking for? I think that might be helpful for us in our review of the applications. So that's just a suggestion.
Okay, I think number one, I think someone who is going to take ownership for getting things done. So someone who can go in and have and maybe all of them need to have this, but they all need to want to get it done. So there can't be I'll just wait on the other person to do it. There needs to be people first and foremost. There need to be people who are dedicated and who are passionate about it. And I don't know how you get at this, but it shouldn't just be a extracurricular for people to mark off their list. It certainly does help on people's resumes and things like that. But I think, and this is harder to gauge, but figure out, do they seem genuinely passionate about this? Because those are the people who are probably going to want to put in the additional work. And then I'd say like people who have ideas and people who have fresh ideas and aren't just looking to be told to do something. Because I think that's one thing Shayla and I have definitely learned is the student advisory committee. Like John Paul is someone who can guide us and do all sorts of great things, but he lets us and you all let us like steer how we want the committee to work. So people who are looking to really come up with things and then execute them, I think those are the ones who are going to make the best out of the position. But then also people who demonstrate that they will work hard, and it's like people who will actually like complete all of their tasks, or if they're delegated something, that they'll do it. I think that's primarily those three things. Things of those sort, but I don't know. Shayla, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so piggybacking off of what you said, I absolutely agree with everything that Alex is saying. I would also say if you want to get specific with like questions on what to look for, maybe a question posing like, what issues are you interested in? These are questions that are direct in that sense, really give you a sense of students that are applying in order to help the progression of what's going on within DCPS and DCPS charter schools, DC charter schools, and those who simply are looking for a title or to give an answer that's already been given, or an answer that feels that they feel you guys would want them to give. So I think that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you both. That's really helpful. Again, you might want to put it down on paper for us.
And I just would echo my appreciation for the hard work that you all have put in to come up with these recommendations for members of the public. You will recall earlier this year, the state board adopted several structural changes. One of those being that we were going to ask the Student Advisory Committee to make recommendations to both expand that role, but also ensure that it represented our students, and in particular, our students east of the river. And so what you have here tonight is our student representative sharing their recommendations. Students, I just want to make a point. It's not necessarily a question. Feel free to respond to it. I really appreciate the recommendations. The only one that gives me some pause is requiring members to show up to student advisory meetings to propose resolutions. I remember we had a similar proposal in the structural changes, and there were concerns expressed. There were many members that pushed back on that additional layer. And so while I appreciate the spirit of engaging students and think we can and should do that, I do want to just make sure that we're being consistent and not necessarily placing barriers for members who may not, for instance, be able to make it to a student advisory meeting and therefore wouldn't be able to introduce a resolution. That said, we should find an alternative way to ensure that students get to weigh in on the resolutions passed. And so the sentiment there is purpose over process, but Alex, go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say one more thing I forgot to bring up. But when you all are considering for the student representatives, make sure you all are also considering like continuity of like the student advisory committee. And I guess this also gets to your point, Emily. You also want to make sure there's a balance of like sophomores / juniors and seniors, because the people in the senior and the who are seniors will probably play like a mentoring role to the younger student representatives, and also like teach them some things and things of that sort. But also I was wondering, Zachary, like along those lines of what you brought up, would it be possible to create something where maybe the maker of the committee of the resolution doesn't have to come to the meeting, but if the student advisory committee, like if it was like just required that we provide input on each resolution?
Yeah, yes, and we could figure out those details, or maybe there could be a representative amongst the members whose role is to go to the student advisory meetings to share out about all resolutions. But yes, I think we can figure that out. But thank you. The recommendations are strong, and we will vote on them later this month at our public meeting. Members, we will not have an administrative committee report. We are looking forward to providing an update at our next meeting. And so with that, we are going to move on to the Assessment and Accountability Committee that is co-chaired by Representatives Patterson and Wattenberg. Again, you will have 5 minutes to share, and then we will open up for 5 minutes total for discussion. And so that means everyone will not get a chance to go or speak, and we will emphasize brevity just so that we can be mindful of the time of our meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to you all.
Okay, so I'm going to start, and then my distinguished co-chair will chime in as appropriate when we get there. All right, so our goals for 2 years are, first of all, to make recommendations to OSSE for how we think they should improve the STAR framework, and specifically recommendations that will minimize the bias that we have established exists that leads to lower ratings for schools with larger numbers of at-risk students, and to address other issues, specifically and particularly what is quality in a school, what really reflects school quality. And specifically, we wanted to address the qualities that schools themselves can address, that schools themselves can be responsible for and be held accountable for. And we hope that this information will be used by families to have conversations with their schools and to raise questions even at higher levels than that. So that's number one. Number two is to advocate, once we have the recommendations, is to advocate with OSSE and with whoever else it is necessary to advocate with to get it into place. And the way the process works is OSSE needs to propose a revised framework to us, and then we need to vote on it. And as the timeline currently exists, that would need to be voted on by March, just about a year, 2022, so that it could be in effect in December 2022, which is the next time there'll be a STAR rating. So that's the plan. So it's first, prepare the recommendations and adopt them. Second, advocate, do what's necessary to get the changes put into place. And then third, once it is in place, to make it a priority of our board to use the indicators that are in that to much better connect strengths and weaknesses that our schools show with the kind of assistance that they get. The rating shouldn't be just a rating, one and done, and you're, either you're celebrated or you're indicted. It should be, here's what's going on in your school. And there are going to be kinds of things that we'll learn through the revised framework, the revised accountability framework, that will lead to certain kinds of improvements. And one of the things that we've also talked about as sort of a supplement to the, whether it's a rating or a dashboard, a supplement that would be the quality school review, which is used in a number of states. It's used in the charter board, where you would actually have individuals who could go into schools and help ascertain, maybe for the schools that were the weakest, what kinds of assistance they most needed. So that's the plan. What I will say in terms of the timeline is, obviously if we want OSSE to turn this around by next March, we want to get our recommendations to OSSE by the end of the summer. And so we're on a quick timeline, but there's a lot of work has been done in the last year by a committee of the board, prior to that by a task force that Representative Patterson was on, and before that by a different committee of the board. So this is not a new issue. A lot is there, and we're going to work on that, and we're going to develop materials that sort of try to lay out some of the ideas on these, on what the accountability framework could look like, what kind of indicators could be in there. And our goal is then to have, we'll be developing these, we'll be in touch with you all about it. And then in June would be our high concentration public engagement month. There'd be a lot of informal engagement prior, but in June, what we're thinking about is, one, a set of ward meetings, as well as a set of other efforts to sort of get input from other folks and do a survey. And then with that, we would have sort of an iterative process of creating some sample proposals, having them discussed in these meetings. We as a committee would then come back and we would propose something to you, and hopefully you would adopt in July, or there was some conversation about possibly August, but that also causes issues. So with that, there's 23 seconds. Sorry, Representative Patterson. I meant to leave you more if you want to get in.
But I will say real quick as he goes into questions, there is a philosophy behind our work and what we're doing. I know there's a lot of technical aspects to it, but the whole philosophy behind it, and we want to make sure as accountability tool, is that it is an indicator. It's an indicator tool of how we're going to hold people accountable, and not an indictment on our teachers. We've had a lot of feedback leading up to this, after it was first introduced a couple of years back, that it was an indictment on all the great work that was happening in work and receiving low stars. So we really want to make this framework more of an indicator of where we can provide equity to the schools that need it the most, and provide it as a tool where others can use it, other advocates could use it, could go to the STAR framework and say, see, this is a school that needs this type of support, and this is the areas that it needs that type of support. So in holding people accountable, we also want to make it a useful tool that's an indicator for equity. So.
Thank you both. We are now going to open it up for 5 minutes. And please raise your hand and we'll call on you, emphasizing please be brief, and we will stop the conversation in 5 minutes to go on to the next committee. Representative O'Leary.
Yes, what do you see as the difference between what y'all are working on and what we just heard about with the auditor, as far as getting responses from the system?
Well, I mean, my initial response would be the auditor is talking about a lot of different information about a lot of different things that speak mainly not just to system level responses. You know, what are LEAs doing? What are districts, schools doing at a macro level? But this would be very specific research, very specific indicators on very specific aspects of quality that were in the control of the school and related to how you judge a school's quality.
Right.
Well, I understand that. I'm just wondering about when you give that report, is anyone listening?
Well, they listen now to the STAR report. They listen now when you give STAR ratings. So I think the answer is yes, but
I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the people who give the STAR report, not the people who have to respond to the STAR report. Because that's what's happening as far as me, as I'm concerned, is what's happening with the audit, is that they come up with all of this dramatic information, but no one was listening.
I think, and I think Representative O'Leary, it speaks to the point of making it something where people have to listen, that it's not ignorable anymore, is what we're really trying to do as an indicating tool. When you
Right.
see a star, it's not something that you say, oh, well, that's what my school received, or I'm going to pick another school because the school that I'm looking at received a low star, but it actually is an indication for help, for support that needs to be there so that you can use it as a way for people to listen and to kind of present outrage that a school like Henley in my ward that has received a low star, but is doing great work, but it needs the resources there. So we're trying to turn it into something that is more of something that where people will listen to it. If
Great, that's what I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Representative Sutter.
Yeah, I'll just chime in as a member of the committee and in response to Dr. O'Leary. One thing we did talk about in our committee is making sure that we're checking in with OSSE at the start of this process and throughout this process so that we're building that same collaborative feedback loop. Not that we think, that will perfectly get them on board with all of our ideas, but that we're building that collaborative culture so that the likelihood that our message gets through is that much greater. And I really appreciate both of our co-chairs being both receptive and agreeing to that as part of our plan.
And the other part that I would just add, and it sort of repeats, but just to emphasize what these guys just said and what I said in the beginning, is we think of this in phases, which is first you need a tool that works. And then part of our job really is to connect it very clearly to the assistance so that it can't be ignored. I mean, you could imagine a piece of legislation that would say, part of the way assistance gets provided is you look at this thing, and we're going to develop the indicators in part based on that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. I will just say in new business, I was going to talk about what I was sharing with Aaron, this idea we need to better support our schools. That is what I'm hearing you all touching on with this. I think it also touches on like the advocacy committee, this push to collect data. So I just am really excited that it seems like there's a lot of synergy about moving more in the direction of true support for schools.
Exactly.
There will be a lot of advocacy work involved in this. So buckle up, everybody.
Yeah, so what we're seeing, President Parker, is that what we're trying to present to this group is something that you would use, or any one of my colleagues would use, of a particular ward, and say, look, this is what I'm seeing happening at my particular schools. It wouldn't just be a grading of schools, but an indicator where you could take this information and basically, if you were testifying and say, at my particular schools, this is what I'm seeing, and you could use the STAR framework, not so much as just a rate school, but to actually say, this is where I'm seeing problems. This is where we need support. I'm here talking about the budget at this particular time, and I'm using the STAR framework as a way to justify why I'm arguing for these things in this particular school.
Awesome. Thank you all. We will now move on to our Educator Practice Committee. And I just want to make sure, did we change the name to Teacher Practice?
We already have.
Or are we just using that interchangeably?
We already have.
Okay, so our Teacher Practice Committee, chaired by Representative O'Leary, go for it.
I'm just the name there. Emily and Alistair and Ebony Rose are the people who are moving the engine. The Teacher Practice Committee met twice in March to discuss the direction of the committee and potential action items it could undertake. We agreed that the main focus areas of the committee are teacher retention and teacher certification and preparation programs. Related to teacher retention, some items we are considering are providing recommendations based on all of the research the State Board has done on teacher retention, such as our teacher turnover research reports from 2018 and 2019, the teacher retention survey report in 2020, and the all teacher survey in 2021, right at the beginning of the year. Areas that the committee is considering for recommendations are social emotional learning, teacher evaluations, well-rounded education, student engagement, and dyslexia. Commissioning Mary Levy for a third report to provide information about teacher retention for SY 2019-20 would cost us $6,000. Related to teacher certification and preparation programs, we're focusing on examining literacy, such as how reading is taught in preparation programs. Some action items are survey teachers about the kind of training they have received and what they would like to receive about literacy, convene expert panels on various ways to teach reading, and conduct reviews of other state literacy plans. Also, we will likely be discussing the Teacher Advisory Committee, which might be the same kind of a committee as the Student Advisory Committee, later in the year, perhaps around August, right before the beginning of school. A topic area that came up during our meetings was the digital divide, especially given the results of the all-teacher survey. We wanted to bring forth this topic at the working session and decide if the Teacher Practice Committee is the right place to tackle this important issue, or if the entire state board should be working on this issue. We came up with ideas such as to advocate for DC to adopt a technology plan for devices and move toward building a public Wi-Fi infrastructure, something we don't have, and to advocate through letters, resolutions, panels for universal access to functioning devices and strong, reliable Wi-Fi, especially after the pandemic, whenever that is. Because one of the biggest problems that we've had in this year now is that there are still students who don't have access to Wi-Fi. And there are a lot of students whose devices don't work well. And I know that our student members have talked about this extensively throughout the year. Those that have are successful, and those that don't have are lost, period. That's it.
Thank you for sharing that. We're now going to open it up for 5 minutes of discussion. Members, please raise your hand for comments or questions. Representative O'Sullivan.
Thank you, President Parker. I just want to say I'm really excited about this. I think my ears perked up when I heard the Teacher Advisory Committee. That's pretty cool, and I think it'll be a great add-on to what we have, and just a testament to the work you all have done. And thank you, Representative O'Leary, for doing a great job at championing this issue. And I'm also, and I'm looking forward to hearing more teacher voice. I know we often see it in the public meetings for our public comment, but I think it'll be great to keep them engaged throughout the process because there are so many teachers, and hopefully the Student Advisory Committee and Teacher Advisory Committee will be able to work together to do some things in the future. So thank you, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you.
Representative Wappenberg.
Yeah, two things. One, I just wanted to appreciate very much the focus on the reading. I think that's terrific. I think it's a great focus for us, and I know it's coming up in the Standards Committee as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And the other thing is just to note that how we have a Teacher Advisory Committee, and also make clear that we want to hear the public. I mean, that we hear a lot from teachers, and I don't want that group of teachers to feel like they're not also part of the conversation. So there's we need both. So how to orchestrate that, I think, is going to be important.
Thank you.
Very forward to it.
Vice President Gasoy.
Representative O'Leary, did you mention the research by Mary Levy?
I'm sorry?
Did you mention the research by Mary Levy?
Yes.
You did. Okay, good. Because that's something we may need funding for, or we do need funding for. So just wanted to make sure.
That is,
Go ahead.
Carlene, do you have a question?
Yeah, to commission that work, is that a procurement situation, or we could be able to directly just making sure this board is fair?
That will be something that we will have to vote on, I would imagine.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
When we can't vote on it here. We would have to vote that as a public meeting.
It is my understanding, Representative Reed and Mr. Hayworth can explain this, but it depends on the dollar amount,
Right.
the technicalities around procurement. Representative Sutter.
Thank you. I don't know if I missed this in the summary of the committee. Is there any talk of continuation of work we talked about in 2 resolutions last year around Latino educators and Black educators and the teacher diversity work? Is the committee planning to take up any elements of those resolutions?
Yes, we are. That has to do with the main things are teacher retention and teacher certification and preparation. So those are all folded into that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I was just typing my appreciation for lifting that up. I was just going to say I wholeheartedly support the continued emphasis and focus on teacher retention. I would love the committee, and I would urge, nudge, recommend that we spend more time focusing on retention, recruitment of educators of color. And so kind of dovetails with what Representative Sutter was just getting at. I will leave it at that.
Okay, well, we'll give the 45 seconds back.
I actually need it.
Oh, Representative Reed.
Sorry. Any talks about pre-service, like, you know, our pipelines from our universities to.
That has to do with the teacher preparation.
Okay, there we go. Preparation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Sure.
I'm really excited for your committee's work. Next, we will have our Education Standards Committee chaired by Representative Sutter.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm dropping in the chat. I hear it's also on Assembly, our committee readout from the March meeting. The committee talked a little bit about the work that we would like to undertake. And we basically have 1 continuing body of work, the social studies standards work, 2 new bodies of work, sort of codification of a process for the review and revision of state standards. We've talked about this before, that DC lacks what some other states have, any clear language on how often standards should be reviewed, what the process is for review and revision. So we'd like to codify that. And then literacy work. And you can read more in the details about how we're engaging in the literacy work. I'll also happily give time to Representative Chang to talk about that. So those are the 2 new topics we've agreed to take on. And then we have a pot of exploratory topics. These are topics that are of interest to members of the committee, but we haven't yet figured out exactly what we would do in terms of concrete actions on these things. So we're treating them as exploratory. Those are homeschooling, whether we should take up a review of the homeschooling regulations, which were last passed in 2008, I think that's right, and are linked in our notes. Or we should get a panel on different learning what would you call them? Approaches to learning that were highlighted during the pandemic. So homeschooling being one of them, digital learning being another. So we're not sure exactly how we'll deal with homeschooling, but it's a topic of interest for the committee. Similarly, digital learning standards, knowing that we went into digital learning whole hog this year, but without a ton of lead time to plan or sets of standards and expectations to guide the work. Is that something the committee could look at, creating a set of standards around digital learning? And then the third thing, which I think is a question of which committee is best positioned to take it up, is the point raised by our public witnesses at last meeting, this question around high school graduation requirements for community service and service learning, and whether those fall within our committee or those sit with the advocacy committee. So we've put that in as an exploratory topic based on not one, being sure what we can do about it at this point without OSCE's partnership, and 2, not being sure where the right place for that question to sit is. When we talked about the needs of our committee, most of our needs seem to fall into staff time to support recruiting panels, time to support creating documents. But there is one thing that we think we might need funding for. That's at the bottom of this plan, and it has to do with aggregating recommendations from community-based organizations on literacy resources. We've decided to target our literacy work to be in partnership with OSCE's state plan on literacy. And the piece we're going to take on is this mapping of resources. So I'm actually going to turn it to Alistair to say a few more words about that, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Representative Sutter. Yeah, so a very exciting time to be working on literacy as it OSCE is preparing to and finalizing, well, a new plan for the city on literacy. The last one was from 2013. You know, the goal at that point for 2018 was something like having 75% of third, fourth graders reading at grade level, right? And so I think this time around, we have another shot at setting a plan that we, I think, you know, that they're thinking much more, it'll be a much longer plan this time, and much more detailed. And the piece that they currently are not taking on, that I've seen done well in literacy plans from other jurisdictions, is this piece around mapping with stakeholders, mapping other stakeholders within the community that also work on literacy. And I think, you know, for us, it's also a way for us to engage our constituents, right? The organizations that either work with students in the schools in our ward, or organizations that are based in our ward, in our wards, to layer on top of the plan that they are building.
Awesome. Thank you, Alistair. So I'll just point out that there's a lot more details about things in the readout, as well as in our committee notes and in the work plan. One question that came up around the existing work, around the social studies work, is around the timeline for engagement. So OSCE's writing committee has, unfortunately, inconveniently, decided to meet on Wednesdays. So unfortunately, their meetings tend to coincide with ours. And so I am working to catch up with the folks leading that work from AIR about whether we are on track to have our CISAC provide some feedback on the framework for the standards that they were to be working on tonight. The plan was to have that happen next week. Next week is spring break. So we're hoping to connect and see if we can't give our teachers a little grace and not ask them to sit in front of their computers over spring break. There were also questions around the timing for public engagement as we go forward with the standards. And for now, until we have the standards come out, we're not going to make any changes to that. But it's something that Ruth has raised for our consideration to make sure that we're providing adequate time for the public to truly engage in providing feedback on any new standards.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments? Representative Wattenberg? You're muted.
You're muted, Ruth.
Thank you. So first, very good report. Thank you, Representative Sutter, for acknowledging the hope and desire for more engagement on the social studies standards. And this is really a question to Representative Chang, or to both, is I think we also talked about, and everything's not in the report, but some focus on really trying to understand from teachers, whether it's through surveys or whatever, how the early intervention is going, because it's something we just don't have a good picture of.
Yes, Representative Sutter, I'm happy to share what I learned from my conversations with OSCE's team that's working on this, and my conversations with folks like Mary Clayman with the DC Reading Clinic. The general sense was that there have been surveys done of educators around literacy already. The Decoding Dyslexia group had answered the question, that one of the questions we were interested in asking, right, around what percentage of teachers surveyed are interested in learning more about how to teach reading, right? And the number was very high, something around 90%, right, of respondents said that they were interested in participating in more, opting in for more training. their sense was that I guess the question, Ruth, and we can discuss this further, was I guess this framing that you're offering now around reflecting on. Am I hearing you talk about how we've been reflecting and learning from what the legislation that's already been passed, or more around? I remember our conversation focusing more around the needs and interests of teachers in learning more about teaching how to teach reading. I think there are programs like the DC Reading Clinic that have more supply than demand within our system right now. There are other states that have offered more opportunities for this gold standard, right, in teacher training around reading, called Letters, right? And those are the things that I remember us focusing on.
No, I think that's right. I mean, we can follow up on it, but to get an understanding, an ongoing understanding of how the implementation is going, what people are getting, what they need. Yeah, I think we're on the same.
And just before Representative Thompson jumps in, I think one thing, Ruth, that Alistair explained to me, and I hope I made clear, but perhaps did not in the plan, in our readout, is that OSSE has picked some things that they are already working on. And the resource mapping is something they are not working on. So we're looking to sort of fill a gap there rather than repeat some of what they're doing. And they really are focusing on some of this teacher knowledge around reading as part of their plan.
Representative Thompson.
First, I'll say that I'm excited about sharing Alistair with this committee because I think there's some great overlap here. And I see us making some good progress or headway as far as literacy in our city. Second, my question is more about the standards for virtual learning. I guess I'd be curious just to hear more how you all are thinking about that and like what falls into that purview. I mean, prior to COVID, we did have virtual schooling. And so I'm curious if that's kind of more the path you're going, or if there are other components that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Representative Reed because this is an exploratory topic she suggested.
Sure. So I guess in the spirit of just watching possibly the expansion of innovations in education, I can see more virtual schools possibly coming online. And was kind of curious if there needs to be like any standards set by the state or what other states are doing to make sure that we're not, accepting any and every program, but whatever comes online meets the standard that DC has set. So that's what I think we were kind of trying to explore. And then, just looking to see if it even was something that the State Board of Education should be under our purview, but then also like looking, well, the State Board does have oversight over or some guidance over homeschooling. So then would like this whole virtual aspect, would it be something similar? So basically trying to get ahead of the curve, watching just trends in education or what we might think life might be like on the other side, I think a lot of people are going to just be home, and that's going to be a big lifestyle change for a lot of our families. And we want to make sure that, families feel like that option have quality choices around virtual schooling.
I really appreciate that. I will say way pre-pandemic. There were some studies when virtual schools started to pop up. And oftentimes they serve the most underserved. And so having standards for those who have not been served well by the system, I would say is extremely important when we start to think about supports and accountability and like, what is it that we guarantee and expect for all students? So I'm happy to hear that and look forward to hearing more.
You're now going.
Yeah, thanks for the time, President Parker, and thanks to my fabulous colleagues for picking right up.
Thank you all. We're now going to move to the Advocacy and Outreach Committee chaired by Representative Reed.
Hello. So the report you'll get after we end, I'll just hit send. But the Advocacy and Outreach Committee met on March 19th. and all members of that committee were present. We developed a bit of a work plan, but I think our main question was how to organize this work, given that a lot could fall under advocacy and outreach. And we wanted to make sure that we were focused on the right things, or maybe not right things, we just didn't get deterred by a lot of things, because a lot can come our way, especially having monthly meetings where we're hearing from the public, just the nature of education in DC, where anything can pop up at any given moment. So this group, we had, we just talked and fleshed out, our thoughts around what it could look like, this committee. And essentially we landed in 3 buckets of next steps. And the first was to gather action items from old resolutions, which I do know the State Board of Education staff have provided. I just haven't got into yet, but we'll probably use our next meeting, which is April 9th, to probably look at some of those items. But basically any open resolutions that haven't been, addressed, or maybe just, loose ends, seeing if we need to address those. Like for an example, this special education resolution, it had like quarterly updates. Are we doing that? What does it look like? Just, as an example of what could be a loose end. The next one was gain an understanding of other committee priorities. And Representative O'Leary was really leaning into that one, because we really want to just see what the other groups are doing so that we don't, duplicate efforts, or, we can just all be on track, because it really all is, again, boils down to advocacy and then outreach. So we wanted to know what you all are doing and look at your plans. And the last area was developing like guidance or some steps on like how to advocate or assess how to advocate whenever testimony is raised. So, if there is either a pressing issue that comes up that maybe a lot of people aren't testifying on, but it's just something that is really pertinent for the board to weigh in on, or if, let's say, I don't know, there's a threshold for if, 10 or 15 people are raising the same issue at a hearing or our body, what is it called? Our public meeting, do we pick it up? So basically all that to say in the last part, guidelines around what is this committee do, or how do we, engage, or how does actually the board engage around outreach and advocacy. So basically maybe developing guidance, since it is our first time out the gate with this type of committee. And let me see. Oh, so, and then lastly, the SBOE staff recommend that we do add tasks related to communications and media, and then budget requests, so that, their time is planned out as much as possible. Our next meeting is April 9th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Did anyone on the committee want to chime in? Okay. Okay, cool. So great. That's our report, and you will get a copy of this.
Thank you, Representative Reed. We will now open it up for questions and comments. I am not seeing any. I'm working on my wait time. Representative Wattenberg.
I just want to say congratulations, and you're getting this going in a big and successful way is just going to be so relevant to everybody else having success. So glad you're in that role, and thank you. Good start.
This is exactly why this committee is nervous, Ruth, because of but we'll figure it out together.
I'm sure you will. I have total confidence.
Yeah, I'm also really excited. I do have a question. It's about the advocacy piece. I really appreciate the follow-up from resolutions. What happens, have you all discussed, and I know you mentioned that you're still having to create those guiding principles, but have you discussed how you will balance the advocacy with student members, and or what if a representative puts forth a resolution that isn't necessarily on the advocacy and outreach committee? Is it like a handoff, or are you all thinking that the committee members themselves would be out in front? Is this Representative Reed as the chair will be out in front? More so, how would you balance if a member not on the committee put forth an issue or resolution?
I think that's to be determined. Definitely not Representative Reed out front. But I do like the point that you raised about, and I think we'll and we meet on Friday about like, you know, when things are raised from the student. I think that's one that we didn't really touch on. The Student Advocacy Committee. That's a really good point of how we, you know, raise information, but basically TBD.
And a quick follow-up. I know the Parent Advisory Committee is under the Advocacy and Outreach Committee. Are we expecting, did your committee discuss whether those parents would be involved in the advocacy, or are they just, is the committee itself just housed under that committee?
I think that's to be determined as well. I think it will become more clear as we get more into the work. And I also just wanted to respond a little bit to your first question as well. So any of the committee members, correct me if this is not your interpretation, but my understanding is that one of our main roles is to look at resolutions, old and current, to see what action items are dangling, you know. So mainly what we're hoping is that we can become more effective, or our committee can help the board as a whole become more effective in the work, the action that we are proposing. So we know that from 2020, when we just go through the list of resolutions, there's a lot of unfinished work there. So one of the tasks we're hoping to take up is to look through there and make proposals about action items we think the state board should follow up on. So in terms of current resolutions or future ones that come up, we're not sure how we'll play a role in that, but I think that too will become more clear as we go forward. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would underscore, especially what Representative Gosoy said about thinking about like how to become more efficient and like where energies go. So for example, like I think the board defaults to resolutions, and I heard you ask a question around what happens if a member makes a resolution. Sometimes a resolution is the advocacy action in itself. And sometimes there's more thinking around, okay, so we made a resolution to begin as a beginning item for advocacy, or a beginning point for advocacy, as a kind of like in the middle of something, or sometimes we're doing advocacy and it's actually not, there's no resolution involved at all. And so just thinking about like how we define advocacy, what are the actions available to the board, and when, how do we drive work to a conclusion, are some of the things I think we have started to discuss as a committee and want to be a little more intentional around as we develop our work plan.
And our Representative Wattenberg, I'm going to encourage you to use the chat, given that we only have 7 seconds and we're going to move on. Sorry. Thank you, Representative Reed, for sharing. We are now going to move over to our Board Governance Committee, chaired by Representative Thompson.
Thank you. So I would like to note that the work plan on Assembly is not as beautiful as the work plan that our committee developed. So that makes me sad, but we'll fix that because it needs some color. I think a few bright lines, if you will, before our work plan, and things we thought of important. Our work plan is kind of chunked. It is in phases. Do I want to share my screen? Maybe. If I can get it together, I'll share my screen. But our work plan is chunked. It's in phases for a couple reasons. One being that there's a lot of information gathering we need to do. It is important for us as a committee to do our homework. It's important for us as a committee to have clear points where we are engaging and hearing from residents and other stakeholders, education stakeholders. And it's important for us to have a process to kind of have a process that doesn't begin with the end in mind. One of the things we talked about is that people mean a lot of different things when they talk about like governance and what it could be. And it is not a question for us of whether we want to go back to something. It's a question for us as far as what serves us well moving forward as a city. So I'm going to try and I have too many windows open per usual, but I'll try and share my screen. One of the things we were very explicit about was having a point in the process where we present kind of draft recommendations so the public knows where we are. So our first phase is more like information gathering, like what is it, like what are the studies around different governance models, what's comparable to us in other cities, where are there places we can adjust authorities. I'm thinking about both some money for a lit review, thinking about focus groups with key stakeholders, preferably with someone external to the board because we want a neutral party to like a true facilitator. And then once we compile that, having a checkpoint where we say like, hey, here are our draft recommendations and having a round of public feedback. And then going back and figuring out how to incorporate that feedback and continuing with that will then have another public set of recommendations. The last thing I'll say is we are taking into account conversations happening at the council level because we want to make sure that as an education stakeholder ourselves, we're doing our job as representatives to share out what we're hearing. And so that first draft recommendations will be ready for what we anticipate to be council conversations in the fall, but they will not be our final recommendations. My committee members are awesome. Did I miss anything?
Money?
Oh yeah, money. I said money. Oh, so we need money for a lit review, in case it wasn't clear. Money for lit review, money for external facilitation. We also may need some money for materials, given that we will have public rounds of communication. So we're going to need some stuff to present to the public. Like we can't go. Don't send us empty-handed. Anything else? That was great, Representative Gasoli.
Okay, not seeing anything else. Thank you, Representative Thompson. We're going to open it up for questions and comments. And while I give folk wait time, I will kick it off. I really, really appreciate the anchoring on the community feedback piece. I really appreciate the sentiment you shared about seeking a neutral, quote unquote, outside source. I think that's going to be important for the work to be taken seriously. And it doesn't seem like we're kind of moving as an agenda. The question I would have is, many people, I know there are advocates in this space. As you mentioned, there's conversations happening at the council. Our work is going forward. Has there been any discussion how you balance that? Or is it like, we're going to take into account what's happening at the council and just engage in community feedback? Will there be any engagement with advocates in the space, or will that be part of the just community engagement portion?
So we did not explicitly outline an engagement process that is separate for advocates. I think as someone who is probably considered an advocate from time, we're part of the community too. And so I think our goal is really we did outline, and I'm actually going to share my screen for real. We did outline a place where we want to have some expert interviews, which is different from advocates. So when I say expert interviews, I mean people who participated in the first review of the PARA report, or possibly, the first review of para and issue that report, or possibly like my council member who was the mayor. He would kind of be an expert on mayoral control in the district, right? Like, so people who have those perspectives, we outlined a specific need to have a conversation with, but we did not separate advocates from the larger group.
Understood. I just will elevate a concern I have, or something that's top of mind for me. There's been criticism in the past when we as a board have done engagement, and some would say, oh, well, you're talking to parents from an advocacy group, or you're talking to teachers from an advocacy organization. And to be clear, I think there are going to be advocates on all sides of this issue. I don't just mean like advocates for one portion of this. And so I do think it's worth considering how we go to residents that are not in the minutia of all of this versus those who are deeply advocating on the issue. But I hear you that you all haven't separated that out, but just keeping that criticism in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I think our goal as a committee is to figure out how best to get both as high quality feedback as possible and high quantity as feedback as possible. I will say, and this is me as an individual, I will say that sometimes I feel it's a bit disingenuous when people try to label others and say like, oh no, you're this. So like your feedback counts more or less, or that like I would not, I'm not someone to default to that, but I think I take very well the point of most people who think about governance and are eager to jump up and have a governance conversation are people who are in the minutia every day. And we don't just want those perspectives.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. I cannot see, let's see. Are there other questions or comments? If you could raise your hand. It's hard to see. I am not seeing additional comments and questions. Okay. Thank you, Representative Thompson. Really excited for your committee's work.
Thank you all. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Last but not least, we have the School Reopening Task Force now committee. I am dropping in the chat a link to a report, if you will, which is not up on Assembly. The information that is on Assembly is also captured here. Our group, we've met twice. All members were present, and I will just run through key headlines. IC is expected to provide LEA's updated guidance on school reopening and federal funds, and the use of federal funds, et cetera, in May or June. A definite date is not, we don't know the definite date, I should say. The committee decided to move away from forming a task force with external members, and instead decided it was best, given our short time frame, to focus on surveys and focus groups. We wanted to produce something by the middle of June, and so again, that is why the thought was, why rush to put together a robust task force that would then have to meet almost bi-weekly in order to get work done. And we thought that the surveys and focus groups may be a better vehicle. The focus proposed and decided by the committee was to survey principals. We've done a lot of work around teachers, but to highlight the needs and perspectives of principals, and particularly with a lens on how they want to use federal funds, in hopes that we can help inform decisions made about the use of federal funds, et cetera. So a few key benchmark dates by the end of April, and so we're weeks away. We are hoping to launch the survey by the end of May. We are hoping to launch our focus groups with sets of principals based on the responses we get from those surveys. And then again, as I said, by the middle of June, we would produce a report with our findings. In the document that I shared with you, and we will be sure to follow up with you, if you click the link, and I can try to share my screen, but for the sake of time, I will not. It will take you to a draft document where you will see proposed questions, comments, and feedback. The committee is meeting again on Monday. We would really appreciate board input so that everyone has a chance to weigh in on the questions we would propose to or pose to principals. And so if you care to, please provide feedback, additional questions in that document, and we will set those questions at our upcoming Monday meeting. Representative Chang is my fearless co-pilot. Anything you would add, as well as members of the committee, anything that you would add?
You did a great job. No, thank you, President Parker.
Thank you. Members, anything?
I guess I'll just add that I am still questioning whether we only want to focus on the funding piece. And I think there are more questions to be asked. And so I'm just wondering if when members chime in, if we're asking them to focus exclusively on, that line of questioning around not just funding, but the use of the recovery funds, or if it's going to be broader.
Got it. Yep.
You might mention what time it is on Monday, in case anyone would like to join.
That is I believe it is 8 a.m. on Monday. And so we like early meetings in this committee, so feel free to join. I really just would stress that we really, really want board input on those questions so that we all feel good about blasting this out to our principals and our wards. The only other thing I would just highlight before taking comments or questions is that Serena Hayes, the ombudsman, is leaning in, and she's joined the meetings, as you can see by the report. And we're really excited to partner with her on this. So any questions or comments? Representative Wattenberg.
So I was going to ask a question about how you're going to do the survey and whether we could buddy up with you, since we want to do a survey, but I get the sense that it's very quick. But I guess my question is broader, and it relates to all the committees, which is a number of us have reasons to do surveys, whether they're with parents, families, or teachers, principals, and whether there's a possibility of sort of trying to pull together several of those needs into a professional survey, or into, or however we're going to do it. Or are you, how are you going to do this? This is going to be made in the office and sent out?
Great question. And what I'm getting from your question is a matter of efficiency, like how, instead of sending 5 surveys, can we be more efficient? And I think that's an important point. It's
partly about efficiency, but it's also about, are we going to invest together to have, to Ebony's point, a professional help us put something together and report it out?
We are talking about that on Monday. It is my understanding that we were going to do a free format survey, and that we were going to keep it pretty simple. But again, that is the discussion that we're going to have Monday. So I hope you will join our committee meeting.
Well, and if I don't, I guess I would just put it to the leadership. Maybe it goes to the admin committee, and to others, is whether we should and can think about something that is aimed at the community. I would think it would be a useful thing for the governance committee. For the admin. I can just think it would be.
To be clear, before any money is allocated to any project, the board will weigh in and vote on it. And so that was another one of the structural decisions that we proposed and approved earlier the year. Yep. But just naming that I think part of going the free route here is just because we're on a time crunch and really trying to get something out by mid-June. Representative Thompson.
I'm trying to wrap my head around, I guess, like how that to be helpful, because what I heard Representative Gasoy say is there's a question of if we just want to focus on the on the funding or not. Is the purpose of the survey and one of the purposes of the committee to capture, like, is it an oversight question? Like, we want to capture so we can so we can know and have that, or is it to kind of hopefully direct? Is it like what?
It's the,
yeah, in a perfect world, if the survey and everything goes perfectly, what would be the outcome?
It's the latter. So it's to inform decisions that OSSI and or the council might make around the use of funding. And that, I know that is very specific, but part of the discussion we had as a committee is that it was better to be very specific, given our very tight timeline, and based on the fact that we're trying to use focus groups. And so, as you know, focus groups need to focus on something. And so that was just the lens that we decided to go with. What you may be getting at is, as I mentioned, the idea of the task force was a bit different when it started. And so it has morphed a bit to now this very, or a more narrow focus on principles and in particular funding.
Can I offer something? So I don't, what is it? I think one of the opportunities, and it really doesn't lie at the principal level, it actually probably lies at the deputy mayor level, is how are we using this funding across LEAs for efficiencies? And like, where are there places of efficiency? So like, if you have two charter LEAs who both need more space to be able to social distance and they're close together, how are we capturing that information? So maybe instead of everybody buying, I don't know, trailers for kids, then maybe they can pool their resources to rent out a space that's actually better. Like, what are the shared needs and opportunities? Since we have such a disparate education landscape, like that actually could facilitate
with our handful of LEAs.
Yeah, some collaboration across LEA. Like, I think that level of information would be helpful.
Yes, so I do want to be mindful of time and want to be fair. I do want to move us on, but yes, I think that what you're getting at is how do we make recommendations around both efficiency, but who can make the decisions around some of these things. I would just offer that I still think we would want to know and hear from stakeholders on the ground, i.e. principals, before making those decisions or recommendations. Representative Sutter, I see your hand up. For time and fairness, I'm going to move us on, but please use the chat to elevate anything. Okay, members, thank you. And I do want to acknowledge that we are running behind time on our agenda, but we are nearing the end of our meeting. Representative Reed, the next section is new business and other points of discussion. Representative Reed.
Mr. President, I apologize. We do actually need to discuss the work plan.
Oh, yes. Sorry. So members, we now will go to Mr. Hayworth, and he's going to review the Gantt chart that staff put together, as well as, and then open up a discussion around any changes that may need to be made at a macro level. Before we go there, again, I just want to thank you all for your hard work. This is a tremendous amount of effort going on, and we should all be really proud of the work that we're engaging in, and by the end of the year, we'll have contributed to. So thank you. Mr. Hayworth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you all very much. So just a real quick thing right before we go into the thing. So this is my current view in North Carolina, and I thought you all should see where this beautiful sunset is so that we can talk all about the work plans that we're about to engage in here in DC. So I want to echo President Parker's remarks about the incredible work that went into preparing these work plans, right? This was a new thing that we've never done before, and it was really a really fruitful exercise, I think, in terms of delving into what each of the elected members wants to talk about and how to do that effectively. And I think that that was, it was a really great exercise for us to engage in. And I'm hopeful that this is a process that we will be able to continue, maybe not every year, but every other year, or at least some form of it, so that we can have that robust conversation continue. So what I did was try to take, and I also want to specifically call out Alex, who was incredibly helpful in helping me understand how to do Gantt charting a little bit more effectively than I am that I'm good at. And Darren and Malayo and Caitlin were also incredibly helpful with their individual committees. So what we did is I took all of the information that I had in hand on April 1st and created this master Gantt chart. So this includes all of the information that I had as of April 1st, when things were planned for every committee. And I'm hopeful that you can see this all on your screens. I've shared the screen so you can see this. This PDF is also available on Assembly. But one of the things that I want you to note is that we have lots going on or plan to go on in April, May, June of this year. It is impossible for us to do all that. We have to reduce what we are thinking and propose to do in order to meet what the capacity is of the state board. We will be an employee, will be out of the office for much of the summer, which means we have reduced capacity. But even in full capacity with all of our staff members, as well as all of our fellows, we will not be able to do more than, say, 2 or 3 major projects at any one time. It's just too much. So the discussion now, frankly, is largely prioritization and having some of those difficult conversations about these are all really important things that we want to work on, and we can't do it all at once. Some of it is time sensitive, right? We have already agreed to a timeline for the social studies standards that we will be continuing to follow for the rest of this year. So that's set in stone. The information related that President Parker talked about related to the reopening, we have deadlines both for that committee and for the board governance committee that are set by our resolution. And so we can't necessarily move some of that in that work. So if those things being set, how do we then make the prioritization about what is going on in our other committees to make sure that we get to everything, maybe not right now, but eventually. And so that's where I would open the questions now from members about what potentially could be shifted or what could potentially be merged with other things. I think some of the conversations that Ms. Wattenberg was speaking about the surveys and the focus groups, is there a way to consolidate some of that information or some of those things? That's a potential, but I think that all is something that we need to decide fairly quickly, and really before the public meeting on April 21st, where we would be voting on a prioritization list of and establishing a work plan for this, for the remainder, at least of this year. President Parker?
Yes, members, please raise your hand so we can engage here. But Mr. Hayworth, can you just frame for reference what is manageable versus not for like staff capacity? Like how many projects a month, for instance, is doable?
Yeah, that's a really hard thing to do, right? Because some projects are larger than others. Some projects will take, a lot of time. Some will take a smaller amount of time. So what I would recommend for members is that the major tasks that are laid out in the work plan, consider those as large projects, right? And we really can't handle more than 2 or 3 of those at any one time that are focuses. We can handle smaller things for those projects, like creating a survey over 2 months rather than 1 month, or creating a report on something that can, or a memo or a summary document, if we really wanted it within 3 weeks, but we can do it in 6, that's something that we can extend a little bit. But generally, any of those sections, we really can't focus on more than 2 or 3 at a time and do them well.
That's really helpful context. As we engage in this conversation, can you share your screen again just so we could see the chart? And then I'm going to go to Representative O'Leary first.
Yes, I know that one of the conversations we had when we were setting up these different committees was, did we have the capacity to do the work with the committees? I mean, this has been awesome listening to the committee reports, but there's a strange feeling in my stomach that we can't get this, we may be spreading ourselves too thin. We may have too many committees. Am I the only one that feels that, especially from what John Paul just talked about, that maybe there could be a collaboration of certain committees?
Well, out of at this juncture, I think that is, given the work that people have put in, I would say I would encourage us to deprioritize that. But I do think instead, to your point, Representative O'Leary, maybe we can find ways to collaborate on projects, or as Representative Wattenberg was saying, maybe collaborate on surveys, since that seems to be a common thread across. Also keep in mind that 2 of these committees, to Mr. Hayworth's point, are time sensitive. And so at the end of the year, they would theoretically dissolve unless we continue them. But I think I saw Representative Sutter next, but Mr. Hayworth, can you just name, it's hard for me to just comprehend what I'm looking at in terms of what's a big project versus a smaller project here. So as we look at April, for instance, or maybe let's use May, for example, how many of these are quote unquote big projects, would you say? Or that's for the committees, they need to tell you what's a big project?
I mean, I would prefer for the committees to make those determinations. I don't think it's appropriate necessarily for me to say. I would say, I think there are aspects of each of the committee's proposals that I would consider sort of a major type project. I think developing a survey is a major project. If we decide to combine a number of survey informations together, I think that's still a major project, but it could still hit a number of the things. We learned too in the surveying that we did with the teacher, with resident education, there is also a pretty steep drop off of your response rate in surveying if you go over, I think the number was 50 questions, right? So we're also somewhat limited in how we might be able to get some information. Are there other ways to try to find this? Like, if we're talking about, principal surveys or parent surveys, are there other ways to find this information? I think that's something that we might be able to consider. I mean, I'm just looking at these types of things. Part of the challenge, right, is that many of these ideas are not flushed out completely yet, or fleshed out completely yet. So we know that there is some really, really great work that we want to do related to the literacy plan. We don't know exactly how and when that's going to fit in. We think creating that resource map will be a really great way for us to be able to be involved in that type of work, but we're not sure exactly how that's going to work. I think some of the review on the accountability framework, for instance, can be working on that from now until, hopefully a proposal in September. That's going to take a lot of time, right? To develop that, to do the public engagement appropriately, to make sure that we're doing everything the way that we need. I don't know, and this is one, I think Representative Wattenberg made this really good point earlier. We intend to have that conversation with OSSE about how that process is going to work. just because it's been sort of the case that you can start submitting revisions to an accountability program in March in the past 4 years doesn't mean it's going to be the process moving forward. And I think we need to have a better understanding of what their plans are on how we're going to do that. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So, so I don't know that that's helpful at all. But
no, that was helpful. Representative Sutter, then Representative Thompson, and then Representative Chang.
Yeah, thank you, President Parker. My question is sort of a process one, because my immediate instinct is to look at the work of my committee and to say, okay, it feels like the most time-sensitive piece right now is our literacy plan because of how it fits into OSSE's timeline. So I could see our committee coming together and having some reworking conversations about our committee's work plan timeline based on what is time sensitive and what is not, and what capacity staff members have to do, what capacity committee members have to do work versus what they don't. So as an example, I have counted on a lot of time to spend on the social studies work. And so I know that the bulk of that time should be on my shoulders, despite Alex's enormous supporting effort. But he and I have already talked a little bit about like what I have to take on versus what he's got capacity for. So I can see internal committees doing that. But what do you think is the right process for us to do this across committees?
Mr. Hayworth, is that on me or you?
I think that's you, sir.
Oh, okay, great. My gut is to actually recommend that we do this offline, which makes me a bit nervous because I know sometimes it's better to just have live communication versus email threads. I do agree that the charge should be for committees to go back and prioritize now that we have this information. And so I'm just thinking out loud, what the admin committee can do at our upcoming meeting is to go through this and make recommendations based on our general understanding. And in the admin committee, you have Representative Weidenberg, Patterson, Gasoy, myself. That recommendations are not decisions. Then have committees go and prioritize, and then somehow we put those two things together. That would be my recommendation. Mr. Hayworth, I don't know if you have something you would add. And the only reason why I would say the admin committee as a next step is because the admin committee, I would anticipate having a meeting before some committees would meet. So the reopen committee is meeting on Monday. We can add this to the agenda. I would imagine all committees are not going to meet in the next couple of weeks, but that could be a request that we make. More to come there, but we will give a recommendation in terms of process. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head at this point. Representative Thompson.
I shared with Jean Paul that I love a good Gantt chart. So I appreciate seeing this all in one place. I think that as I process this, it would be helpful now that like given this evening, a lot of us presented where we see external capacity needed. I think that should be, since we're going to have that, we also have to have that discussion around like what can we actually pay for. That's still like a missing layer to this. Is like when we decide like, okay, what can we contract out? How do we allocate those resources? That'll be part of this. I totally agree with Representative Sutter that making sure we delineate where member time, like where members can take on things, is super important and helpful. I would like to, I think, have a better sense of how, like, what the parameters are, like how, like what are things we're taking into account across the board if we're going to go back into our committees and prioritize. Like I would like to have some shared sense of how to prioritize what others are prioritizing. I totally understand that we're probably not going to have at this point another meeting before our public meeting, and maybe it's that we actually do need some type of brief special meeting just to talk about like how we prioritize things. Like, because this makes me feel like something, if I was in the office, I would walk over to somebody else's office for, instead of entering into the email thread hole. Yeah. So those are my rumblings.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Representative Ching.
Yeah, thanks.
You're muted.
I do think that we should decide on a process tonight before we split up, because I think deciding that will be much more complicated over email. To me, it could be, right, just to throw some ideas out, each committee has, X number of points, and we allocate that somehow in terms of prioritizing within our committees, right? Whether that's dollars or, or estimates of time that need to be spent, and then also how urgent it is, right? And what month does it need to get done, right? There's, and then I think another. But that's the thing, right? There's so much that we need to get done. Another way to think about it is, how do we, what is our minimum viable product, right? So for our survey, for example, President Parker, we're not trying to come up with something that's similar to the teacher survey that had been done by the board, right? It's not about sort of necessarily a, this percentage of principals said X. I think if we are, thinking more broadly about asking open-ended questions, and that helps inform us in a way, right? It's more about learning than it is about reporting, I guess, if that makes sense. I think that both the amount of time or money and legitimacy, right, of that product goes down, but I think it still helps us accomplish a goal quickly, right? And we could come together and say, actually, we don't need any staff time for this, right? And we don't need any money for this. Here are the questions we're going to send it to principals in our ward, and let's just learn from what they send back, right? And I think there's different pieces of that we could be thinking about as well. And then just personally, because I'm obsessed with this. The literacy side of this, John Paul, when I did talk to Aussie, they would be interested, at least in our last conversation, in including what we put together as an appendix for the actual literacy plan.
Thanks. Okay, so this is what I'm going to suggest. I'm looking at the calendar. Our public meeting is on the 21st. That is 2 weeks from today. Would it be reasonable to ask committee chairs to, in whatever way they can, that may be in a meeting, offline, email, phone, answer 2 questions. One is, what are all of the tasks that the committee is producing and the deadlines by which that task needs to be completed? And 2, what are the priorities, or to put those things in a prioritized list? So essentially come up with a prioritized list with the deadlines by which those things must be completed. And then the admin committee will have a special meeting next week, let's say Wednesday or Thursday, to move all the chess pieces based on that. We share it back to the board in time for a review of the information resolution ahead of our meeting. And so that members would get something back by the 16th, I'm thinking at the very latest, ahead of our 21st meeting. So
President Parker, I think Ruth's point is really important here. It's deadlines, priorities, but also resources involved, right?
yeah, so I think in the admin committee, yes, let's add that. And so some of this I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So prioritize lists, deadlines by which things must be completed, and which things do committees think staff need to support versus what members can own.
Can we, so to my point about, and I say this because I'm still newish to this body, how we prioritize, it would be good to hear or have a little notes section around like why I think something is prioritized. Because I don't take for granted that we're all like all the way in each other's heads. And if you all are gonna go back and kind of like make all the chess pieces move, as you said, that would probably be helpful information for you, instead of assuming what we meant. So like, I don't, I'm trying to figure out how to best understand others' thinking so you can prioritize the priorities, if that makes sense.
Yep, no, I think that's a great push. I think that's a great recommendation. And so yes, members would be encouraged, those chairs would be encouraged to offer brief explanations around or rationale around the prioritization as well. And just the 16th is a holiday, so we would need to get materials out by next Thursday, the 15th. So we will follow up after this meeting with deadlines, expectations, and I'm trying to manage the chat while also sharing. So put those steps in the follow-up. Yes, we will send an email, but just tentatively, if we ask chairs to get back to us by the end of day on Monday, which is the 12th, we know that our literacy event is on the 14th, but somehow that the admin committee would need to convene on or before the 14th so that we can get something out for your reaction on the 15th, which would still give us days before the 21st to negotiate, move things around, debate if necessary. And the reason why I think the 21st is important is because there are several time-sensitive items in here, as you've already mentioned. And so we may find, and I worry that if we decouple some of this and say we're going to move some things forward while we still negotiate with the rest, that gives unfair advantage to things that just may have a tighter timeline. So if you could use the chat just for feedback. Thank you. So we will, yes, I will follow up with those dates and what we would be asking. But just to repeat one more time, we would ask chairs by end of day on the 12th, Monday, to provide a prioritized list of the things that their committee is seeking to produce by absolute deadlines, with some explanation around the rationale, as well as a note around which items would staff be able to own or need to own versus which items members would be able to own. So more to come. I know this is a little messy, but I still think it means that we're doing a lot of great work and it's going to be a very productive year. So Mr. Hayworth, did you have more to share here, or do those next steps suffice for now?
I think that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Question. So the funding piece, assuming that it does not affect the timeline, we will tackle that in May. That will give the admin committee time to review, make proposals based on the feedback received, and then we can talk about that and vote on that in May. But I worry that rushing to do that by the 21st may not be realistic. Okay, feel free to reach out with any additional questions. We are now going to move to new business and other points of discussion. I'm noting that it is 8:17. We have on our agenda for this portion to be 5 minutes. I'm going to suggest we give ourselves at least 13 minutes here, in part, and my apologies if you hear my dog in the background, in part because I do want to honor Representative Reed's request to talk about the public meeting format. And so I suggest we start there and then open it up for new business points of comment. So Representative Reed, if you don't mind, can you just elevate what you were sharing offline around what you were hoping to accomplish in this share out?
It's dinner time. So I was hoping that we can maybe add a brief overview of what the public meeting will look like to each of our working sessions, just so that, everyone can prepare. We can be, on the same page in regards to like possible resolutions or ceremonial resolutions and possible topics, or if a panel needs to be put together, just more using this space to collaborate around what the public meeting could look like. It doesn't have to be long, but just so we can know what we're going into, or whenever the draft agenda becomes available, there are no like surprises. So.
Awesome. That is putting the pressure on the admin committee to be prepared to share these updates. I'm happy to share what is decided up until this point and then open it up for reaction comment. At our March public meeting, there was discussion around focusing on literacy. There seemed to be broad buy-in from the admin committee on that topic. There was a suggestion, the original idea was to invite academics and advocates to talk about literacy and the continuum from early grades through adulthood, and what are the issues and how we might advance the cause of literacy. There was an additional suggestion to focus it more on hearing from policymakers and potentially academics in connection to the literacy plan that we are wanting to work on with OSSE. We have not talked about that as a admin, but I do know that Vice President Gasoy and I, based on the emails that were shared, seem receptive to that idea. And so that would be the focus generally. So let's say for now, well, I guess that's a point of discussion, but it generally would focus on literacy, either hearing from advocates and academics or policymakers, talking about what might be added to our focus on that literacy state plan. And then obviously the traditional elements of public meeting, ceremonial resolutions, and public comment. Questions, comments? Representative O'Leary. Representative O'Leary, if you are speaking, you're muted.
Yeah, I was speaking, but I was speaking to my son. I just wanted to thank everybody. January, February, March, April is, we've had 4 meetings now with the new State Board of Education. And as a coach, that was the rookie season is over now, folks. So now it's really time. You can't use inexperience on the board, or I've only been on the board for this many months, or anything like that as an excuse. We're not listening to it anymore. This is a fabulous advocacy group, and we need to really, really start pushing to make sure that our students and our teachers and our parents are taken care of in this tumultuous time. So I'll send you all a veteran pin, because everybody's a vet now.
Thank you for that impromptu pep talk, Representative O'Leary. Representative Thompson.
I like to say that I'm going to be new until there's somebody newer than me. That's my rule. And I encourage y'all to adopt that. Kind of like I'm not late if I'm not the last one. So there's that. I think my question, to kind of dovetails with, like, I appreciate Representative Reed raising this as a suggestion so we can be better prepared as members. And also because, like, I know I've been encouraging a lot of people in my community to come out and participate. And it's super helpful if I can tell them this is what we're talking about. But I guess I know that in March, I don't know my time, but I think that was in March, I suggested we have a expert panel around budget, and I'm grateful that that happened. I have no sense of how we decide what the expert panel will be about, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know what's other than, like, I think this is great. Like, what's a great suggestion? Like, what's taken into account, like how we make that decision. And I'm not saying that all of that has to be shared now. But like, I would like, I know we have some retreats on the schedule. Like, maybe that's something we can think about, a retreat. So like, how do we make those decisions, make those panels like timely, intentional, meaningful? Because while I would like to believe that I think about all those things when I recommend something, I always appreciate a check. And I always appreciate a push. Yeah, and I want to make sure that we're stewarding that time the best we can as a body.
No, thank you for that. The push is well received, and I echo Representative Reed. It is helpful to talk about this. You all will remember there is a document, and maybe the document is not the best way to do it. Instead, we should have these discussions. There is this balance of, like, what do you discuss publicly versus need to be handled offline. But there is a document, we can reshare it, where members are encouraged to make recommendations. What Representative Reed's recommendation illuminated for me was that the feedback loop we didn't close the feedback loop. So members would make recommendations from that document, which members have been using, but outside of that, we haven't done a good enough job of circling back. But I also want to just continue to encourage you all to reach out and share. I do want to spend it, because we do have a short amount of time. In terms of process, what we're going to recommend is that this is a charge of the admin committee to take up. And I agree, we can focus on this at the next retreat, but I would hope we would get tighter on it before then. So Vice President Gasoy, I think we should add this to the next admin committee to just figure out what are the processes and how can we share both in this meeting, but also offline, so members are well prepared.
Agreed.
For the March public meeting and that literacy focus, are there any questions, thoughts, reactions there?
Are you talking about the April?
What's today's date? I'm sorry. Yes, it's April.
I was like, I missed something.
I've been saying March all day. I'm sorry. Yes, the April public meeting.
I think we need to talk about the mayor putting the budget back a month. That to me is like the most important thing that's happening right now, because schools aren't even going to know how much money they have until schools close, if the budget is even put out until the end of May. I think we need to have somebody come and talk about that, or something like that. I mean, that's big news.
It is big news. Okay, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page, ultimately the admin committee makes these decisions. So if we get 10 suggestions, technically it's supposed to be the admin committee that decides what those panels and the like are going to be. Representative Sutter.
Thanks. Yeah, so my only comment on the literacy is that I hope, and I'm presuming that the admin committee is talking to Representative Chang, since he's leading that work on our committee. And I hope that we think about who we haven't heard from in the literacy space yet, because we had good conversations around the science of reading, and we got some clear information on that. And we had some good conversations about the dyslexia bill, and we got some good insights on that. And we've had a couple of panels on special education as it relates to reading. So I'm just wondering, like, what's the open space in a Venn diagram of literacy issues that we could make sure we're using this panel to dive in on?
No, I think that's a great push. Again, as I was mentioning, to be completely transparent, the admin committee has not convened. But I would say personally, I am receptive to focusing on the policymakers' literacy, having a panel of policymakers share so it connects to the work that we're doing with OSSI. I think that seems timely, it makes sense. And to your point, Representative Sutter, it would be a different lens with which we would be looking at that work.
President Parker, I'm so sorry. Can I just jump in there? I think it's OSSI related, but also just to frame what I had shared with President Parker and Vice President Gassoy over email. I think, you know, one thing that came up when I was talking with OSSI is that they've been looking at what's going on in Mississippi and Tennessee and Rhode Island and a few other states that have made policy changes, investments, right? Things like letters, right? For teacher training, things like, I think there's some things that I would want to be able to ask the policymakers and Ebony Rose, I think we're using the word expert very generously here, but experts from other states, right? About what has worked, what hasn't, what are some of the trade-offs that they considered, how much do things cost? Because that is also a piece that I think should be very much something, we're not working in a silo, right? And I often feel like with a lot of these conversations, we are, right? In the DC space, and I think this is not necessarily in the mandate of OSSI when we're putting a literacy plan together, but haven't yet had a chance to talk with and learn from some of those other states beyond what we can find online. And I think it would be nice to be able to ask some hard questions, right? Are Mississippi scores, have they jumped ahead of ours because of the investments they've made in teacher training? Or how much of that has to do with the fact that they are also holding people back a grade if they don't pass a certain level, right? Those kinds of things I would really be interested in. Right. Those kinds of things I'm really interested in being able to ask the policymakers as we're building this out. And I think it would inform the plan, right? But also how we approach literacy as a board longer term.
Representative Reed.
Thompson had it before me.
Oh, Representative Thompson.
I'm honestly getting sleepy, so I didn't even realize I missed my place in line. I think there are a couple of places we could learn from. I'm happy to, and I shared this with Representative Chang because we ended up having a conversation about this. There are a couple places I'm happy to follow up and see if there are some connections I can be helpful in making. I think about Richmond in particular, who is using their federal stimulus dollars to make sure that every teacher, both pre-service and in-service, is trained in the science of reading as a way to accelerate learning. So I'm happy to think about, like, I would add that lens as far as like what are things given our both what OSSI wants to do and given the charge we have around COVID recovery, if there are particular intersections that can be helpful, given the COVID committee's work in trying to help schools think about directing funding. So that is my thought. I want to put on the record before I forget. Happy to be helpful.
Yes, Representative Chang did share those suggestions, and we do want your help and need your help, and that's to all members. And so because I think what we're getting at is there are still some decisions to be made. I'm gonna, for the sake of time, ask that after Representative Reed, we move on. We will it's clear that the admin committee needs to perhaps have a special meeting for this, but also the committee work. And while we had a clear vision around the direction of the April public meeting, the suggestion to change it, I think, is now why we are kind of still in the gray space because we haven't had an opportunity to convene on that topic. So, and we need to confirm the guests for that. So we will share more information with you and admin committee members. I'm going to suggest that we find some time tomorrow, somehow, some way. And John or Mr. Hayworth, I know you may not be available for that, but some way for us to come together to talk about these things and share back with the board.
I'll send an email. We actually have a meeting on the calendar for next Wednesday, but I think we need to change it. So
yeah,
I'll send
I think that's going to be too late. Okay, thank you.
I'll just close by. I don't think like whenever we add this to this section of the meeting, it doesn't have to be, my view wasn't, it didn't have to be like really extensive. It was just really like, so far we received, 2 ceremonial resolution ideas. We're thinking about having a panel on this topic. Give your ideas or thoughts by X date, and then any other bullet items that we just need to orient ourselves to and possibly, communicate to you all so that the admin committee can do that on, I guess, in its space. So I guess in the future, it doesn't have to be like really long or belabor it. It's just like a snapshot of what might happen at the next meeting.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great suggestion. And you have your finger on the pulse of an issue that we have yet to figure out. So thank you for that. This month is a little special. It's a little messy just given the change at the last minute, but I agree that we should be able to get through it pretty quickly moving forward. And thanks again for elevating that. All right, we are now going to move in the next 10 minutes to new business. And Representative Wattenberg, I know you said you wanted to make comments. And so I'm going to turn it over to you. Not for the whole 10 minutes, by the way.
Well, we'll see. No, I have just a couple minutes. So I was approached by the United Way, which is a group that does a lot of work with community schools here in DC. And Fraser and I at one point actually did a field trip with them to some of their schools. Anyway, they are putting in a proposal to Representative Norton's office for a project that would work with community schools in DC to provide kind of gap money around getting families online, starting almost immediately and through the summer when a lot of students are going to lose their DCPS and their school laptops. As I understand it, this is it's a federal grant and there are earmarks, so to speak. And so Representative Norton has an ability to recommend certain projects get these dollars. So I am going to, and I think it sounds great. I mean, part of what it will do is they have a pot of money that would just purchase devices for those families that essentially are going to be cut off for the summer and go on. Anyway, I'm getting the proposal. I've talked to her about it. We have a cover letter just recommending this program, and I'm going to sign it. And I think Fraser is, but he and I sort of went in circles today, so I don't know about that. But I'm going to send it around to folks and urge you to sign it, and then it will go to United Way. We'll take it to Norton's office, and hopefully they'll get some money, and it will really get out to our families. That's it.
Thank you. Are there other points of new business? Representative Thompson?
I guess 2 things. First thing, so bullet A. I know I recommended, and it sounds like, and I'm grateful for the board doing a ceremonial resolution to honor President Davis, which I'm appreciative of. I look forward to voting in favor of that at the public meeting. Sub-bullet B, since Jock noted my colors today, maybe we can wear red to the public meeting and wear red for Ed for Liz. Second thing, other ceremonial resolution I like to put on the table is for the National Teacher of the Year at ATON. I don't know if like the council did anything to recognize him, but we clearly value and love teachers here, not saying they don't. So it would be good to recognize him as well.
Absolutely. I think both of those are great suggestions. I will need to find like a red tie or something, but we will, I like that idea a lot. And the Teacher of the Year has been with us. We recognized him when he won locally, but I think we should definitely celebrate the additional recognition that he's received, and it's so well deserved. There are 2 points up. I'm seeing additional hands. Representative Chang, there's 2 points that I have, but I'll share after everyone has had an opportunity to go.
Hey, yeah, sorry, if we're talking about ceremonial resolutions for this month, it is School Library Month this month. I don't, how does this work? If I propose it, am I writing it?
You can, if you care to, otherwise staff supports in writing them.
Okay.
But usually the ceremonial resolutions that are especially important to members, they will take a lead in generating language around it.
Yeah, I think, you know, especially because it is something that is affecting that's back in question right now. I think I'd like to propose that we consider acknowledging the work that our school librarians do in DC.
Awesome. Yes. 2 things to note. This is not, originally I had hoped that we could address them at the this month's public meeting, but just given tonight's conversation, I'm realizing that it's going to take a lot of time and energy to align on the committee work. And so I'm going to push this to May, but I'll put it on your radar. I briefly shared it with Representative Reed, but there are 2 resolutions that I'm hoping that the board will support and that I'll introduce next month. One is around the underutilization and the underfunding of the SNAP program in particular, but also the underutilization of that federal program, as well as a host of other programs. Obviously, this is important for at-risk students. The short of it is there is money being left on the table. There are a number of families that are eligible for these funds that are not taking advantage of them. And therefore translates to there are young people in households that are not receiving added benefits that they otherwise could, that we know impacts their learning. So the push will be for there to be a commission established, whether that's at the council or OSSE, to investigate what are the barriers for families not securing these funds. Is it because they don't want to? Is it because they don't know how? Is it access, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a big issue in DC in particular that the underutilization of those programs. 2, and it connects to what I was sharing with Aaron Roth earlier, this push around how we better support our schools versus only talking about accountability. And while accountability has its place, I will put it on me. I have long felt that as a statewide agency, there's a lot more work that we can do, even in light of the report card. And yes, I know there are a subset of schools that receive additional funding, but there's more that we can do for all LEAs and schools in terms of support. And so based on the conversations I've heard from the Assessment and Accountability Committee, I'm now thinking like, oh, maybe we should collaborate on this. But the gist of it is, how do you look at a state like a Massachusetts that, in my opinion, has a pretty strong and robust school district support system? They use data, they identify schools that need support. They then have specific offices that are designated just for that support. They do school visits, they do support, they work with school leaders, teams, so that schools are not only hearing from the statewide agency for accountability purposes, but the state agency is also there working alongside them to improve the outcomes for students. I will share much more information. I don't know if that is something Representatives Wattenberg and Patterson, you all had in mind, but it seemed like maybe that support piece could be something. And yes, Nebraska also. I know there's a number of states, but I would be open to collaborating with you all on that. So those are just the 2 points. Look for more information in May. Oh, okay, Representative Thompson.
Sorry, and I know this is like still not the longest meeting we've ever had, but it's long. So one thing that's been kind of rolling around in my head, and I don't know, hopefully, well, it'll probably still be relevant. So Representative Reed and I both sent letters to the Public Charter School Board around charter applications proposing to locate in our ward. There have been a bunch of subsequent conversations around the letters, the public meeting, different input. I think one of the things that I have taken away, which I well, not taken, yeah, taken away, but I think was underscored for me is there is an opportunity to improve the weight communities are given when it comes to the Public Charter School Board's process. And in conversations with some of the staff and the members, it seems like they are open to working with the board in particular around that. I know that as a governance committee, we're going to take on a whole bunch of stuff. And I actually don't think this is something that is isolated to the governance committee, because as I've shared before, I do firmly believe that representative is our title, but it is also absolutely our job description. And so thinking about putting it on the table and thinking about how can we do a better job of creating processes that serve our constituents when in DC, we know that charters particularly serve communities that have been underserved and marginalized. We need to now lean in as people who are elected to have some responsibility around creating processes that are actually designed for those populations and are responsive to those populations' wants and needs. And so I don't expect it. This is not a ceremonial resolution. This is not something we're going to come up with an answer before our public meeting, but it is something that I think needs to be on our radar. And we as a board have an opportunity to really move the needle on in a positive way.
Thank you. Seeing no other requests for new business, I will entertain a motion to adjourn for tonight.
I move that we adjourn the April working session of the State Board of Education.
It has been
I second.
Moved by Representative, I just had a moment, moved by Representative Reed to adjourn our meeting, is properly seconded. And so all in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. It is now 8:45 and this meeting of the State Board of Education is adjourned. Thank you to members of the public for tuning in, and we will see you in a couple of weeks at our April public meeting. Good night,
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.